man on the internet here, and we need to talk about the single most analysed panel in One Piece history. Chapter 574. The Fist. The Hole. The moment fictional pirate creator man decided to rip out our collective hearts and show them to us, still beating, before crushing them into dust. You know the panel. I know the panel. Your grandmother, who has never read manga, somehow knows the panel because someone on Facebook posted it with a crying emoji in 2010. And the psychic damage was transmitted through the cultural zeitgeist like a virus. Portgas D, Ace, 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, son of the Pirate King, brother to Monkey D. Luffy, takes a magma fist through the chest. Donut tear tragedy. The whole heard around the world. And for 15 years, the fandom has asked the same question with varying degrees of emotional stability. What if he didn't? What if Ace survived Marineford? Now, the surface-level answer is obvious. Luffy's happy. The Whitebeard Pirates have their fireboy. Sabo eventually reunites with both brothers, and we get the ASL trio back together doing crimes on the high seas. Roll credits. Everybody goes home satisfied. Except, here's the problem with that reading, and I need you to really hear me on this one. That take is the analysis of someone who has not done the emotional maths. That take is the copium-infused wishful thinking of moist cry cows who wanted the good ending without understanding what the good ending actually requires. The evidence screams something far more uncomfortable. Ace surviving Marineford doesn't create a better timeline. It creates a timeline where the dawn of the world is delayed, diminished, or potentially prevented entirely. And we're going to spend the next 25,000 words proving it. But first, we need to establish the divergence point. We need to understand exactly how Ace survives in this alternate timeline. Because the mechanics matter. The specifics matter. This isn't Silhouette Piece where we can just wave our hands and say, somehow Ace returned. We need to ground this cockery in canonical logic. So let's rewind. Chapter 574. Akainu has just finished his verbal dismantling of Whitebeard's legacy. He's called the old man a failure. He's told Ace that his father, his captain, his entire existence amounts to nothing. And Ace, being the emotionally volatile, moist cry cow that fictional pirate creator man specifically designed him to be, stops running. He turns around. He takes the bait. This is critical. Ace's death isn't an accident of positioning or bad luck. It's a character assassination in the most literal sense. Akainu doesn't kill Ace with magma. He kills Ace with words. The magma is just the finishing blow. Luffy, exhausted beyond measure, collapses. Akainu redirects. The fist that was meant for Ace pivots toward the vulnerable younger brother. And Ace, in his final moment of clarity, does what Ace was always going to do. He interposes himself. He becomes the shield. He takes the hit. Now, in canon, this is where the story ends for Portgas D Ace. But we're not here for canon. We're here for the what if. So let's examine the variables. Variable 1. Luffy's position. In canon, Luffy collapses at a specific angle that puts him directly in Akainu's trajectory. What if he collapsed differently? What if the exhaustion hit 2 seconds later, 3 feet to the left? This is the butterfly wing. The smallest change in Luffy's fall position could mean Akainu's redirected strike misses entirely, or hits a non-vital area, or gives Ace an extra half second to dodge. Variable 2. Akainu's commitment. And this is where it gets interesting, folks. This is where the man on the internet puts on his conspiracy hat and starts connecting red strings on the corkboard. Because here's something the fandom doesn't talk about enough. Akainu hesitates. Go back to the panel. Look at it. Really look at it. Akainu's attack on Ace is not the same as his attack on Whitebeard. Against Whitebeard, Sakazuki is all in. Maximum output. Fleet Admiral or die energy. But against Ace? Against the son of Roger? There's a reading of that sequence where Akainu isn't trying to kill Ace at all. He's trying to kill Luffy. Ace intercepting the blow is not the plan, it's an inconvenience. Now, why would that matter? Because Akainu is not a mindless killing machine. The man has ideology. He has food. Theory motivations running deep. He eats his meals alone, folks. He sits in silence and consumes his justice like it's sustenance. This is a man who believes in absolute moral clarity, which means he has a hierarchy of targets. And in that hierarchy, Luffy, the son of Dragon, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, the most wanted man in the world, ranks higher than Ace. Ace is the son of a dead man. Luffy is the son of an active threat. So here's the divergence. In our what-if timeline, Akainu's fist connects, but not with full commitment. Maybe he pulls back at the last microsecond because his true target moved. Maybe the magma disperses slightly wider, less concentrated. Maybe, and this is the spicy take, maybe Akainu subconsciously doesn't want to kill the son of Gold D. Roger in front of Monkey D. Garp. Because let's talk about Garp for a second. Garp is right there. Chapter 574 makes it explicit. Garp is watching this happen, and Akainu knows what Garp is capable of. He knows that Garp could have been an admiral. He knows that Garp chose not to be. And he knows that Garp, despite his marine loyalty, raised both of these boys. If Akainu kills Ace directly in front of Garp, what happens? Does Garp finally snap? Does the hero of the Marines turn on his own institution? Akainu is absolute justice, but he's not stupid. He saw what happened when Squad stabbed Whitebeard. He saw how quickly the tide of battle can turn on a single emotional moment. Killing Ace right in front of Garp risked creating another emotional flashpoint. So maybe, just maybe, in our divergence timeline, Akainu's strike is calibrated to wound rather than kill. A hole, yes, but not a donut tier hole. A survivable hole. Ace goes down. Ace bleeds. But Ace breathes. And everyone on that battlefield thinks this is a victory. Marco swoops in with his Phoenix flames. The regeneration fire does what it does. Law, who is right there on his submarine, has the op fruit and the surgical skills to stabilize. Jinbei grabs Luffy. Someone grabs Ace. The retreat happens almost exactly as it did in canon, except this time there are two brothers on that submarine instead of one. The Marines don't pursue as aggressively. Why would they? Whitebeard is dead. The objective is accomplished. The symbol has been destroyed. Ace surviving is an afterthought, a consolation prize for the pirates that doesn't change the fundamental outcome. The world government got what it wanted. The era of Whitebeard is over. Shanks arrives. The war ends. The Paramount War concludes with a body count that's almost identical to canon, -1. And here's where the lie begins. Because everyone, the Whitebeard pirates, the revolutionaries watching from a distance, Luffy himself, everyone interprets this as a win. Ace is alive. The mission succeeded. The war was worth it. The sacrifices meant something. But the man on the internet is here to tell you that this interpretation is wrong. This interpretation is the comforting delusion of people who haven't thought 3 moves ahead on the chessboard. This interpretation ignores the foundational truth of One Piece storytelling, which is that fictional pirate creator man does not do happy accidents. Every survival in this series has a cost. Every death has a purpose. And if Ace's death had a purpose, then his survival has consequences. The lie that Ace's survival is an unambiguous good will persist for exactly as long as it takes for the first domino to fall, and that domino is already tipping. Because Whitebeard is still dead, the old era is still ending, and now, instead of a clean break, Instead of a definitive ending that allows for new beginnings, we have Portgas D, Ace, the son of the Pirate King, walking around the new world with a target on his back the size of Marineford. The war is over. The real war is about to begin. The war is over. The real war is about to begin. And if you think I'm being dramatic, you haven't been paying attention to how fictional pirate creator man structures his narratives. Because here's what doesn't change in our alternate timeline. Here's the constant that remains fixed, no matter how many butterflies flap their wings in Marineford Bay. Edward Newgate, the strongest man in the world, the man who could destroy everything with a swing of his Bacento, still dies. Let that sink in for a moment. The fandom gets so caught up in the Ace of it all that they forget Whitebeard's death is not contingent on Ace's death. These are separate tragedies occurring in the same location. Whitebeard was dying before Ace took the magma fist. Whitebeard was dying when he stepped off the Moby Dick. The man showed up to Marineford with one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel labelled centuries of accumulated battle damage and an illness fictional pirate creator man never bothered to name. Chapter 575 through 576. Whitebeard versus Blackbeard and his crew. The dog pile, the gunshots, the blade wounds, the final declaration. One Piece exists. The man dies standing. In our timeline, in the What If timeline, this happens exactly the same way. Ace being alive on Law's submarine doesn't give Whitebeard extra health points. It doesn't regenerate the whole Akainu already put in his chest during their earlier clash. It doesn't undo the stab wound from Squad or the cumulative damage of fighting an entire marine war machine. Whitebeard dies. And here's where the emotional mathematics get complicated. In canon, Whitebeard's death is the exclamation point on Ace's death. It's the final gut punch in a sequence of gut punches. The reader processes both losses together, as a unit, as the complete destruction of the Whitebeard era. There's a grim symmetry to it. Father and son both gone. The clean break that allows everyone to move forward. But in our alternate timeline, Whitebeard dies and Ace lives. And that's not a tragedy with closure. That's a tragedy with a survivor. That's a wound that won't close because the person most affected is still walking around, still breathing, still having to process what happened. Think about what Ace witnesses in this version of events. He's on Law's operating table, barely conscious, phoenix flames still flickering across his partially healed chest. And somewhere in the chaos, he learns that his father figure took a death blow from the same man who murdered his crewmate, Thatch. He learns that Whitebeard, the man who gave him a family, who gave him a reason to exist, who looked at the son of Goldie Roger and said, "You're my son now," died to give him the chance to escape. Canon Ace doesn't have to live with that. Canon Ace dies moments after Whitebeard, and whatever reunion happens in the afterlife presumably involves a lot less survivor's guilt. But our Ace? Our alternate timeline Ace? He gets to carry that weight forever. He gets to wake up every morning and remember that Pops died so he could live. Every meal he eats, every laugh he shares with Luffy, every moment of joy is built on the foundation of Whitebeard's sacrifice. This is not the setup for a happy character arc. This is the setup for a man who will never forgive himself. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about Shanks. Red-haired Shanks arrives at Marineford in Chapter 579, and in canon, his intervention serves a specific narrative purpose. He's ending a war that has already taken everything worth taking. Ace is dead. Whitebeard is dead. Shanks shows up to prevent further pointless bloodshed, to collect the bodies, to impose the ceasefire that allows both sides to retreat and lick their wounds. His presence is the period at the end of a tragic sentence. In our timeline, Shanks arrives to a different scene. Ace is alive. wounded, critical, but alive. Whitebeard is dead. The Marines have technically achieved their stated objective, the execution of Portgas D Ace, except they haven't, because Ace escaped. Sengoku is standing there with what I can only imagine is the most constipated expression in Marine history, because how do you spin this? How do you tell the world that you gathered the full might of the world government, sacrificed thousands of soldiers, destroyed half of Marineford, and still let the main target slip away? Shanks's intervention in this timeline isn't ending a tragedy. It's preserving a powder keg. Because Sengoku has a choice to make. Does he accept the ceasefire and let the Whitebeard pirates retreat with their wounded commander? Or does he push forward, overrule Shanks, and try to finish what the Marines started? In canon, the choice is easy. Ace is dead. Mission accomplished. No reason to keep fighting. But here, Ace is alive. The mission failed. And every admiral, every vice admiral, every Marine watching knows that letting Ace escape makes the entire war pointless. The evidence suggests Sengoku accepts the ceasefire anyway. Why? Because Shanks is Shanks. Because the red-hair pirates are fresh and the Marines are exhausted. Because pushing the issue risks turning a partial victory into a complete catastrophe. Sengoku swallows his pride, accepts the face-saving narrative that Whitebeard is dead and the era has ended, and lets the pirates go. But here's the thing about face-saving narratives. They only work if everyone agrees to maintain the fiction. And the world government is not a monolithic entity with unified interests. Akainu is furious. Akainu just watched his kill get stolen. The man who would become Fleet Admiral in the post-war restructuring is standing in the rubble of Marineford, covered in the blood of pirates he couldn't finish off. And he's taking notes. The Marines retreat. The Whitebeard pirates retreat. Shanks presumably exchanges some meaningful looks with people and says something cryptic, because that's what Shanks does. And for a brief, shining moment, it looks like everything worked out. The Moby Dick survivors gather. Marco takes stock of who's left. The commanders who made it. The commanders who didn't. Vista, Jozu, the ones who held the line. They look at Ace, unconscious but breathing. And they feel something that almost resembles hope. This is the lie taking root. Because what the Whitebeard pirates don't understand yet is that they haven't won anything. They've survived, which is not the same thing. They've escaped a battle, which is not the same as winning a war. They have Ace, but they've lost Whitebeard, and in the brutal calculus of New World politics, that trade is not in their favour. Whitebeard was a deterrent. Whitebeard was the reason no one messed with his territories, his allies, his family. Whitebeard's name on a flag meant, touch this island and die. That deterrent is gone now. It died standing on Marineford. And Ace, for all his strength, for all his fire, for all his status as the 2nd Division commander, is not a replacement. The Marco effect kicks in here, folks. You know what I'm talking about. That phenomenon where the story tells you one thing visually, but the subtext screams something else. The Whitebeard pirates look like victors sailing away from Marineford. They've got their boy back. They're together. But look closer at the composition, at the body language fictional pirate creator man would draw in this scenario. Marco's not celebrating. Vista's not smiling. They're counting heads and coming up short. They're doing the math on how many brothers they buried in that bay, and the number is not small. The lie says Ace's survival made it worth it. The truth is that nothing could make Marineford worth it. They paid a price that can't be calculated, and now they have to sail into a new world that knows their father is dead. The celebration, such as it is, won't last long. The celebration, such as it is, won't last long. Because here's a truth about organisations that the One Piece fandom consistently fails to grapple with. The thing holding a group together is almost never what you think it is. The Whitebeard pirates were not held together by shared ideology. They weren't a crew united by a common dream of finding One Piece or becoming Pirate King or overthrowing the world government. That's Luffy's model. That's the Straw Hat paradigm where everyone has a personal goal that happens to align with the captain's trajectory. The Whitebeard pirates operated on a completely different organisational principle. They were a family, and the father of that family just died. Now, in any functional family structure, the death of the patriarch creates a succession crisis. This is basic sociology, folks. This is the kind of thing that tears apart kingdoms and corporations and, yes, pirate crews. Who inherits the authority? Who makes decisions? Who speaks for the family now that the voice everyone listened to has gone silent? In canon, this question becomes somewhat moot because Ace is also dead. The Whitebeard pirates dissolve not through internal conflict, but through external pressure and collective grief. The payback war happens. Blackbeard wins. Marco and the survivors scatter to the winds. There's no succession crisis because there's nothing left to succeed to. But in our timeline, Ace lives. And Ace living creates a problem that nobody wants to talk about. Let's look at the hierarchy. Marco the Phoenix is the 1st Division Commander. By any reasonable metric of power, experience, and institutional knowledge, Marco should be the one to step into Whitebeard's role. He's got the mythical Zoan that makes him functionally immortal in combat. He's got decades of experience sailing with Pops. He's got the respect of every commander and the loyalty of the rank and file. Marco is the obvious choice, except Ace is the son of Gold D. Roger, and this is where the emotional maths get ugly. Because what does Ace represent to the Whitebeard pirates? What does he symbolise? To some of them, he's their brother. Full stop. He's the hot-headed fireboy who joined the crew, tried to kill Pops 40-something times, and eventually became family. These crew members don't care about Roger. They don't care about bloodlines. Ace is Ace, nothing more. But to others? To the ones who've been sailing since the Rocks era? To the ones who remember what the name Gold D. Roger meant when the man was still alive? Ace is something else entirely. Ace is the heir of the Pirate King. Ace is the continuation of a legacy that predates Whitebeard, that exists parallel to Whitebeard, that in some interpretations supersedes Whitebeard. The Vivre Card databooks give us crucial information here. They tell us that Ace was respected, even beloved within the crew. But they also tell us that his heritage was known, at least to the commanders. And heritage, in the world of One Piece, is never just trivia. Heritage is destiny. Heritage is the reason the world government wanted Ace dead in the first place. So now you've got a crew in mourning, a crew that just lost everything. And within that crew, you've got 2 implicit factions forming. Faction 1 says Marco leads. Marco was the 1st Division Commander. Marco has seniority. Marco is the safe choice, the stable choice, the choice that maintains continuity. Faction 2 doesn't say anything out loud, but their eyes keep drifting to Ace. Because if you're going to rebuild the Whitebeard pirates, if you're going to reclaim the territories and the influence and the respect, doesn't it make sense to rally behind the most symbolically powerful figure you've got? The son of Roger, leading the crew of Whitebeard. The union of the 2 greatest pirates of the previous generation manifested in a single person. That's a narrative. That's a statement. That's the kind of thing that makes other crews think twice before challenging you. And here's the worst part. Ace doesn't want it. Go back to the Marineford arc. Go back to chapter 574. Before the fist, before the whole, before everything. What does Ace say? He says he only ever wanted one thing: to know whether he deserved to be born. He says he found his answer. He says he's grateful for being loved. At no point, in no panel, in no SBS or databook or supplementary material does Ace express any desire for power, for leadership, for the burden of commanding thousands of pirates across dozens of territories. Ace wanted a family. He got one. And now that family is looking at him like he might be their new father, and he's standing there with a healing hole in his chest and the knowledge that Pops died so he could have this moment, and he wants absolutely none of it. This is the setup for a moist cry cow arc of unprecedented proportions. Ace, drowning in survivor's guilt, being pushed toward a leadership role he never asked for, by people who love him but don't understand him. Marco, watching his younger brother struggle, knowing he should step in, but also knowing that the crew might not follow him the way they'd follow Roger's son. The commanders, divided not by malice, but by differing interpretations of what honouring Whitebeard's legacy actually means. And everyone is so focused on the internal drama that they're not paying attention to the external threat calculus, which has shifted dramatically. Because the new world is watching. Kaido is watching. Big Mom is watching. Blackbeard, fresh off stealing the Gura Gura no Mi from Whitebeard's corpse, is very much watching. And what they see is not a crew unified by grief. What they see is a wounded animal trying to figure out who's in charge. In the political ecosystem of the new world, weakness is an invitation. Territory that was untouchable under Whitebeard's protection is suddenly very touchable indeed. Fishman Island, the various allied kingdoms, the islands that flew the Whitebeard flag as a shield against other Yonko encroachment, all of them are doing their own calculations right now. Do they stick with the remnants? Do they seek new protectors? Do they try to go independent and hope nobody notices? The Whitebeard pirates need to project strength they don't have. They need to maintain an illusion of unity while grieving, while rebuilding, while figuring out basic questions of authority and direction. And they need to do all of this while protecting Ace, who is still, let's not forget, a marked man. The world government didn't spend all those resources on Marineford because they were bored. They wanted Ace dead for a reason. That reason hasn't changed. The son of Gold D. Roger is still the son of Gold D. Roger. The bloodline they fear is still flowing through his veins. Every day Ace remains alive is a day the world government's investment fails to pay dividends. They'll come for him again. Maybe not immediately, maybe not directly, but they'll come. And when they do, whoever is standing next to Ace becomes a target by association. This is the Ace problem. Not that Ace is weak. Not that Ace is unworthy, but that Ace existing, Ace breathing, Ace being Ace, makes everyone around him less safe. He's a lightning rod shaped like a person. He's a magnet for every form of violence the world has to offer. And the Whitebeard pirates, bless their loyal hearts, are going to stand next to him anyway, because that's what family does, even when it kills them. Even when it kills them. And speaking of things that kill people, let's talk about Monkey D. Luffy. Because while the Whitebeard pirates are navigating their succession crisis and Ace is drowning in guilt he didn't ask for, there's another character in this alternate timeline whose trajectory has been fundamentally altered. And unlike Ace, whose changes are obvious and external, Luffy's changes are subtle, internal. The kind of damage you don't notice until it's too late. In canon, Luffy breaks. I need you to understand how significant this is. Luffy, the boy who laughed at execution platforms. Luffy, who punched a celestial dragon in the face without hesitation. Luffy, whose response to every obstacle has been to grin and push forward. That Luffy shatters into pieces on Amazon Lily. Chapter 590. The breakdown. The moment fictional pirate creator man showed us that even rubber can crack if you bend it far enough. Go read that chapter again. I'll wait. Actually, I won't wait, because this is a script, and time is a construct, but you should go read it later. Because what Oda draws in those pages is not sadness. It's not grief. It's a complete psychological collapse. Luffy screaming. Luffy clawing at himself. Luffy asking why he couldn't save the one person he came to save. The raw, ugly, unfiltered despair of a young man confronting the limits of his own power for the first time in his life. And then Jinbei shows up. Chapter 591. The conversation. Jinbei, who has lost more than Luffy can imagine, who watched his Captain Fisher Tiger die, who saw his kingdom fall under the shadow of pirates and marines alike, sits with this broken rubber boy and asks him a question. Luffy, what is it that you still have? This is the pivot point. This is the moment where Luffy's entire psychological framework gets rebuilt from the ground up. Because Luffy's answer, the process of arriving at that answer, forces him to stop focusing on what he lost and start focusing on what remains. His crew, his dream, the people counting on him. The realization that Ace, in his final moments, didn't ask Luffy to avenge him. Ace asked Luffy to live. That realization is the foundation of everything that comes after. The 2-year time skip. The training with Rayleigh. The Luffy who emerges in Sabo 2 years later. The one who walks past the pacifista without breaking stride. Who carries himself with a quiet confidence that wasn't there before. That Luffy was forged in the fire of Chapter 591. That Luffy exists because he broke completely and had to put himself back together with new pieces. Now, remove the fire. In our alternate timeline, Ace lives. Luffy wakes up on Law's submarine, exhausted, damaged, pushed beyond every limit he knew he had. But Ace is breathing in the bed next to him. Ace is alive. The mission succeeded. Luffy still hurts. Don't get me wrong, the trauma of Marineford doesn't vanish just because Ace survived. Luffy watched his grandfather's institution try to murder his brother. He watched Whitebeard die. He saw things in that war that no 17-year-old should see. Rubber constitution or not. There's damage there. There's processing that needs to happen. But there's no breakdown. Why would there be? The worst thing didn't happen. The nightmare scenario, the one that's haunted Luffy since Sabo's apparent death all those years ago, the fear of losing another brother, didn't come true. Luffy pushed himself to the absolute limit, and it worked. He saved Ace. He did what he came to do. This is a victory. This feels like a victory. And because it feels like a victory, Luffy's brain doesn't shatter the way it did in canon. He's exhausted, not broken. He's relieved, not destroyed. He recovers faster because there's less to recover from. And this is where the man on the internet needs you to understand something crucial about character development in fiction. Faster recovery is not better recovery. Shallower wounds heal quicker, but they don't build scar tissue. They don't teach lessons that stick. Canon Luffy learns, in the most brutal way possible, that wanting to protect people means nothing if you don't have the power to do it. He learns that his current strength is insufficient. He learns that there's a gap between his ambitions and his capabilities, and that gap got his brother killed. That lesson burns itself into his soul. It becomes the engine driving everything he does for the next 2 years. Our alternate timeline, Luffy. He learns that if he pushes hard enough, if he wants it badly enough, things work out. He learns that desperation and determination can carry him through impossible odds. He learns that he can save the people he loves if he just tries hard enough. Do you see the problem? One of these lessons prepares you for the new world. One of these lessons gets you killed in it. The new world is not a place where wanting it badly enough matters. The new world is a place where Kaido, bored and drunk, can one-shot you because you haven't developed the haki necessary to even scratch him. The New World is a place where Big Mom's rage can literally tear apart islands. The New World doesn't care about your determination or your dreams or how much you love your friends. The New World cares about power, and if you don't have it, you die. Canon Luffy walks into the New World knowing he's not ready. He knows, with the certainty of someone who watched his brother die in his arms, that he needs to be stronger. Every fight, every training session, every moment of growth is driven by the memory of his failure. He's running from something even as he runs towards something. Our Luffy walks into the New World thinking he's proven himself. He infiltrated Impel Down. He broke into Marineford. He saved Ace against impossible odds. What can the New World throw at him that's worse than that? The answer, of course, is everything. The New World can throw everything at him, and he won't be ready for it, because he never learned that he wasn't ready. He never had the lesson beaten into him with magma and grief and the weight of a dying brother in his arms. Jinbei might still talk to him. The conversation might still happen, but it won't land the same way. How do you tell someone to focus on what remains when they haven't lost anything? How do you teach the value of what you have to someone who got to keep everything? The lesson requires the loss. The growth requires the trauma. That's not me being edgy. That's fictional pirate creator man's entire thesis on character development, written across 900 chapters of pirates learning things the hard way. Luffy will train with Rayleigh. He'll learn haki. He'll get stronger in all the measurable ways. But there will be something missing. A hunger that isn't there. A desperation that didn't take root. He'll be a good pirate. He might even be a great pirate. But will he be the pirate who can carry the weight of the dawn? That's the question this timeline has to answer. And right now, lying in a bed next to his living brother, Luffy isn't asking it. And right now, lying in a bed next to his living brother, Luffy isn't asking it. But he is making a decision. Chapter 597. In canon is one of those pivot chapters that doesn't get the respect it deserves. It's sandwiched between the emotional devastation of the war arc and the hype of the time skip, so readers tend to blow past it. But this is the chapter where Luffy, still grieving, still processing, still wearing the psychological wounds of Marineford like a second skin, makes the choice that defines the next era of the story. He rings the ox bell 16 times. He throws a bouquet into the wreckage. He stands in front of the cameras with Rayleigh and Jinbei, and he sends a message. 3D2Y. 3 days becomes 2 years. The Straw Hats are not reuniting on schedule. They're going to train. They're going to get stronger. And when they come back, they're going to be ready for the New World. In canon, this decision is born from desperation. Luffy has just experienced the most catastrophic failure of his life. He went to Marineford to save his brother, and he failed. He had Ace in his arms, freedom in sight, and he watched Akainu take it all away. The 3D2Y message isn't a strategic choice. It's a vow. It's Luffy saying never again with his actions, because saying it with words would require him to speak the loss out loud. Rayleigh's offer to train him isn't an opportunity in canon. It's a lifeline. It's the Dark King looking at a broken boy and saying, I can make you strong enough that this never happens again. And Luffy grabs that lifeline with both hands because the alternative is drowning in his own inadequacy. Now let's transpose this to our timeline. Luffy still goes to Marineford with Rayleigh and Jinbei. He still rings the ox bell. The message still goes out. 3D2Y. 2 years of training. Same actions, same timeline, same apparent outcome. But the motivation is completely different. Our Luffy isn't making a vow. He's making a calculation. He looked at Marineford and he saw, correctly, that he was outmatched. The admirals were too strong. The warlords were too unpredictable. He survived through luck and allies, and the intervention of forces beyond his control. If he wants to operate in the New World, If he wants to find One Piece and become Pirate King, he needs to level up. This is rational. This is reasonable. This is exactly what a smart pirate should conclude after nearly dying in the most heavily fortified marine installation in the world. And it is catastrophically insufficient as a driving force. Because I need to get stronger to achieve my goals is not the same thing as I need to get stronger so I never watch someone I love die in front of me again. The first motivation is external. It's about obstacles and objectives and the practical requirements of piracy. The second motivation is internal. It's carved into the soul. It's the kind of drive that makes you train through exhaustion, push past limits, fundamentally reshape who you are as a person. Rayleigh will notice the difference. The man trained the Pirate King. He knows what real determination looks like. And when he looks at our Luffy, at this alternate timeline Luffy who showed up with his brother still breathing, he's going to see something slightly off. The hunger will be there, but it won't be the same hunger. The commitment will be there, but it won't have the same edge. Will Rayleigh say anything? Probably not. The Dark King isn't the type to psychoanalyze his students. He'll train Luffy. He'll teach him haki. He'll do everything he did in canon because Luffy is still Luffy, still the man Shanks bet his arm on, still the inheritor of the straw hat and everything it represents. But training isn't just about technique, it's about transformation. And transformation requires fuel. Canon Luffy has an endless supply of fuel. Every time he gets tired, every time he wants to quit, all he has to do is remember the weight of Ace in his arms, the heat fading from his brother's body, the last words he'll never unhear. Our Luffy doesn't have that fuel. He has gratitude instead. He's grateful Ace survived. He's grateful the nightmare didn't come true. And gratitude is a beautiful emotion, a healthy emotion, but it doesn't drive you through walls. It doesn't make you wake up at 3 a.m. to practice observation haki until your mind-brain feels like it's bleeding. It doesn't turn you into the kind of monster who can stand against emperors. The Straw Hats receive the message. Scattered across the world, each of them sees the newspaper, sees the code, understands what Luffy is asking. 2 years. Train. Get stronger. Come back ready. And here's the beautiful, tragic thing about the Straw Hat crew. They don't question it. They don't need explanations or justifications. Luffy said 2 years, so it's 2 years. Zoro will go to Mihawk. Sanji will suffer in the Kamabaka Kingdom. Each of them will push themselves to their breaking points because their captain asked them to. They're doing this for a Luffy they think they understand. They're imagining the Luffy from canon, the one who lost everything, the one who needs this time to rebuild himself from the foundation up. They don't know that their Luffy is different. They don't know that the fire burning in his chest is a smaller fire, a cooler fire, a fire that might not be enough when the real tests come. The lie has crystallized. Everyone believes this timeline is better. Ace is alive. Luffy is training. The Whitebeard pirates are regrouping. The pieces are in motion for what looks like a triumphant return. 2 years from now, Luffy will reunite with his crew, sail into the new world, and continue his journey toward the One Piece with his brother cheering him on from across the ocean. That's the story everyone is telling themselves. That's the comfortable narrative. That's the version where Marineford was a trial overcome, not a warning ignored. But the man on the internet sees the cracks. The man on the internet has done the emotional maths on this timeline, and the numbers don't add up to a happy ending. Because while everyone is celebrating the victory they think they won, forces are already in motion that nobody is paying attention to. Sabo is still an amnesiac in the Revolutionary Army, his memories locked behind a door that only Ace's death could open. The power vacuum left by Whitebeard is still gaping wide, and the predators circling it don't care that Ace survived. Blackbeard still has the Gura Gura no Mi, still has his crew of Impel Down's worst monsters, and now he's looking at a world where the Mera Mera no Mi is still attached to its original owner. The lie says everything is fine. The lie says the worst is over. The dominoes say otherwise. And in Saga 2, we're going to watch them fall. The dominoes say otherwise. And the first domino to fall wears a pineapple-shaped hairstyle and carries the weight of an empire on shoulders that were never meant for the throne. Marco the Phoenix has a problem. Actually, Marco the Phoenix has about 17 problems, but let's start with the big one. He's now the de facto leader of the Whitebeard pirates, except he isn't, except he has to be, except Ace exists. In canon, Marco's post-Marineford trajectory is tragic but clean. Whitebeard dies. Ace dies. Marco inherits the remnants of a broken family and does his best to hold them together. The Payback War happens approximately 1 year after Marineford. The Whitebeard pirates, seeking vengeance against Blackbeard for his role in Thatcher's death and the subsequent cascade of disasters, challenge the Blackbeard pirates for territory and honour. They lose. Decisively. Marco and the survivors scatter. It's a defeat, but it's a defeat with clarity. Marco fought for his family's memory and lost. There's no ambiguity about leadership, because there's no one left to lead except the people who chose to follow him. The hierarchy resolved itself through attrition. Our timeline doesn't get that clarity. Marco is the first division commander. He has seniority. He has power. He has the respect of his peers and the loyalty of a rank and file. By every metric that matters, Marco should step into Whitebeard's role. The phoenix rises from the ashes, quite literally in his case. It's poetic. It's appropriate. It's what Pops would have wanted. Except Pops is dead because he was saving Ace. And Ace is the son of Gol D. Roger. And the Whitebeard pirates are not a democracy, but they are a family. And families have complicated feelings about inheritance. Let me paint you a picture of the conversations happening on whatever ship the Whitebeard remnants are using as their flagship. Vista approaches Marco. Yozu, arm reattached or perhaps lost depending on how much healing they could manage, sits in the corner. The other commanders, the ones who survived, gather in the captain's quarters that still smell like Whitebeard's sake. They need to talk about succession. They need to talk about leadership. And nobody wants to be the first one to say what everyone is thinking. Marco should lead. But Ace is right there. Now Marco himself would probably defer to the practical choice. He'd say something self-deprecating about not being Pops, about just wanting to protect what's left of the family. Marco isn't power-hungry. Marco isn't ambitious. Marco is a guy who found a family, loved that family, and is now watching that family struggle with questions that have no good answers. But here's the thing about leadership vacuums. They don't stay vacant just because no one wants to fill them. Someone has to make decisions. Someone has to negotiate with the territories that were under Whitebeard's protection. Someone has to interface with the other Yonko and the Marines and the countless opportunists who smell blood in the water. If Marco takes that role explicitly, he's the captain. And if Marco is the captain, what is Ace? Second Division commander under a new captain. That works structurally, but symbolically, it's a mess. Ace, the son of the Pirate King, subordinate to Marco, a man who was himself subordinate to Whitebeard. The optics are weird. The power dynamics are weird. And every time Ace opens his mouth in a strategic meeting, people are going to wonder if they should be listening to him instead. Alternatively, Ace becomes co-captain. Two leaders, shared authority, a dual command structure. This sounds reasonable, until you remember that dual command structures almost never work. Who has final say? What happens when Marco and Ace disagree? How do the subordinate commanders know whose orders to follow? The third option is the one nobody wants to say out loud. Ace takes over entirely. Marco steps aside. The Whitebeard pirates become, in effect, the Roger succession crew, led by the son of the man Whitebeard considered his equal. This preserves symbolic power, but throws away institutional knowledge. Ace has been with the crew for a few years. Marco has been there since the beginning. Ace is a hothead who nearly got himself killed because he couldn't ignore an insult. Marco is a measured tactician who kept the crew running while Pops focused on the big picture. None of these options are good. All of them create friction. And friction in the new world gets people killed. But wait, we haven't even gotten to the external problem yet. Because while the Whitebeard pirates are having their awkward succession conversations, the rest of the world is doing math. And the math says that the son of Gold D. Roger is currently sailing around the new world with a target on his back the size of Laughtail. The world government didn't execute a public war against the Whitebeard pirates because they were bored. They did it because they wanted to end the bloodline of Roger before it could threaten their order. That mission failed. Ace is alive. And every single day he remains alive, the world government looks weaker. You think they're going to let that slide? You think Akainu, freshly promoted to Fleet Admiral in the post-war restructuring, is going to sit in his office and accept that the son of his most hated enemy got away? The man who preaches absolute justice, who burned O'Hara to the ground on the possibility that a scholar might escape, who would rather destroy the world than let a single evil go unpunished. Akainu is coming for Ace. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but he's coming. And when he comes, he's not going to make the same mistake twice. There won't be a public execution with advance notice and time for rescue attempts. There will be a surgical strike, a sudden appearance, magma, and finality. Marco knows this. Marco has to know this, which means Marco's job isn't just lead the crew. Marco's job is keep Ace alive while leading the crew, while managing succession politics, while defending territory, while everyone in the world wants your brother dead. This is an impossible position. This is a scenario where failure isn't a matter of if, but when. Marco can be the greatest leader in the history of piracy, and it won't matter, because he's playing defense against the entire world with a roster that's been decimated and a prize that everyone wants to take from him. The payback war, in our timeline, might not even happen the same way. In canon, it was about vengeance. The Whitebeard pirates had nothing left to lose, so they threw themselves at Blackbeard with everything they had. In our timeline, they have something to lose. They have Ace, which means they might not take the aggressive stance. They might prioritize defense over offense. They might let Blackbeard consolidate power while they focus on keeping their family intact. And Blackbeard? Blackbeard is absolutely fine with that. Blackbeard loves it when his enemies give him time. Time to recruit. Time to plan. Time to hunt for devil fruits that will make his crew unstoppable. Marco is doing his best. Marco is always doing his best. But the phoenix can only rise from the ashes so many times before he realizes that everyone around him keeps burning. Marco is doing his best. Marco is always doing his best. But the phoenix can only rise from the ashes so many times before he realizes that everyone around him keeps burning. And speaking of burning, let's talk about the fire that never ignites. Somewhere in the world, probably on Baltigo, probably surrounded by Revolutionary Army personnel who respect and admire him, a young man named Sabo is going about his day. He's competent. He's skilled. He's risen to the position of Chief of Staff, the number 2 in the entire revolutionary hierarchy. Second only to Dragon himself. By any objective measure, Sabo is a success story. A noble son who rejected his birthright, faked his death, and rebuilt himself as a warrior for freedom. There's just one small problem. He has no idea who he is. Chapter 794 gives us the canonical explanation. Sabo's memories, his true memories, the ones containing Ace and Luffy and the Seikei cups and the promise of brotherhood, were locked away by trauma. The celestial dragon's attack on his boat didn't just nearly kill him, it fractured his psyche. The mind brain, in its desperate attempt to protect itself, walled off everything that came before. Sabo woke up with skills and instincts but no context. He knew he hated nobles. He couldn't remember why. He knew he wanted to be free. He couldn't remember who taught him what freedom meant. Dragon found him. Dragon raised him. And Dragon being Dragon didn't push. The Revolutionary Army gave Sabo a new identity, a new purpose, a new family, and Sabo, having nothing else to hold on to, accepted it. For over a decade, this was enough. Sabo became one of the most formidable fighters in the Revolutionary Army. He developed his pipe-fighting style. He trained his haki. He led operations and recruited members and did all the things a chief of staff is supposed to do. If you met this Sabo, you'd think he was complete. You'd think he was whole. You'd be wrong. Because here's what Chapter 731 shows us. The moment Sabo sees the newspaper, the moment he reads that Portgas D Ace, son of Gold D Roger, has been executed at Marineford, the panel is devastating. Sabo's face contorts, tears stream down his cheeks, and in that moment, the wall breaks. Everything comes flooding back. Ace, Luffy, the treehouse, the grey terminal, the cups of sake and the promise that made them brothers. Sabo's memory return is not a gradual process. It's not therapy or meditation or careful excavation of buried trauma. It's a sledgehammer to the dam. The shock of Ace's death is so overwhelming, so fundamentally incompatible with the protective amnesia, that the mind brain has no choice but to release everything it's been holding back. Koala describes it in the manga. She says Sabo cried so hard she thought he might die. She says he was inconsolable for days. She says he blamed himself, tortured himself, couldn't forgive himself for not being there. And then he got up. And then he went to Dressrosa. And then he ate the Mera no Mi and inherited his brother's will in the most literal way possible. That's the canon Sabo. Broken open, flooded with memory and grief and guilt, but forged into something new. A man with a complete identity. A man who knows exactly who he is and what he's fighting for. A man carrying Ace's fire as both weapon and memorial. Now remove the trigger. In our timeline, the newspaper headline reads differently. Portgas D Ace escapes Marineford. Or maybe Whitebeard falls, son of Roger survives. The details don't matter. What matters is that Ace is alive. What matters is that the shock doesn't happen. Sabo reads the paper. He sees the news about Marineford. He registers that a major war occurred, that Whitebeard died, that the world is changing. And he feels nothing. Or rather, he feels the abstract concern of a revolutionary strategist observing global power shifts. He doesn't feel the personal devastation that would shatter his amnesia. He doesn't cry. He doesn't remember. The wall holds. This is the tragedy that nobody in our alternate timeline knows is happening. Ace survives and everyone celebrates. Luffy trains with his brother alive, and everyone thinks this is better. But on Baltigo, a man who should be whole remains hollow. A brother who should be reunited with his family doesn't even know he has a family to reunite with. And the Revolutionary Army suffers for it. Now you might be thinking, man on the internet, Sabo was already the chief of staff without his memories. He was already competent and powerful. What difference does it make? The difference is everything. Amnesiac Sabo is a weapon. Complete Sabo is a person. Amnesiac Sabo fights for freedom as an abstract concept. Complete Sabo fights for freedom because he watched the grey terminal burn, because he felt what it meant to be trapped by circumstances of birth, because he made a promise to two boys in a treehouse that he would live free and help others do the same. Motivation matters. Purpose matters. The fire in your belly. The thing that makes you push through exhaustion and pain and doubt. That determines how far you can go. Complete Sabo has the Mira Mira no Mi by the time of Dressrosa. He has Ace's fire powering his already formidable combat skills. But more than that, he has certainty. He knows who he is. He knows what he's doing. He's not fighting because the Revolutionary Army told him to. He's fighting because his brothers need a world worth living in. Amnesiac Sabo has none of this. He's strong, yes. He's skilled, yes. But there's a ceiling on what he can achieve. And it's a ceiling made of questions he can't answer. Who was he before? What did he lose? Why does he feel empty sometimes, when by all rights he should feel fulfilled? Dragon notices. Of course Dragon notices. The man who leads a global insurrection against the world government doesn't miss details like, "My chief of staff seems psychologically incomplete." But what can Dragon do? Force the memories back? That's not how trauma works. Tell Sabo about his past? There's no indication Dragon even knows the full story. Sabo was a child when Dragon found him. A wounded, amnesiac child with no context and no history. Dragon works with what he has. He gives Sabo responsibilities and trust and the opportunity to grow. He probably hopes, in whatever passes for hope in Dragon's tactical mind, that time will heal what he cannot. But time doesn't heal this. In canon, only shock heals this. Only the unbearable weight of loss, great enough to break the dam. So as the 2-year time skip begins, as Luffy trains with Rayleigh and the world reorganizes itself around Whitebeard's absence, Sabo remains on Baltigo. He does his job. He leads his missions. He exists in the peculiar limbo of a man who is everything he's supposed to be and nothing he actually is. The Revolutionary Army marches toward the Reverie, toward the declaration of war against the Celestial Dragons, toward the confrontation that will reshape the world. And they do it with a chief of staff who is operating at a fraction of his potential. Not because he lacks training, not because he lacks dedication, but because the thing that would make him whole is the thing that didn't happen. Ace lived. Sabo stayed broken. The emotional maths are brutal, folks. They're absolutely brutal. Ace lived. Sabo stayed broken. The emotional maths are brutal, folks. They're absolutely brutal. And they get worse when you zoom out from the personal tragedy to the strategic implications. Because the Revolutionary Army isn't just a collection of idealists with weapons. It's a machine. A precisely calibrated, globally distributed machine designed to do something that has never been done in the history of the One Piece world. Bring down the world government. That machine has components, and when one component operates at reduced capacity, the entire system suffers. Let's talk about what the Revolutionary Army looks like at this point in the timeline. Dragon is the leader, the world's most wanted man, the son of Garp, the father of Luffy, the enigma, wrapped in a cloak, wrapped in a perpetual refusal to explain his motivations. Dragon operates on a level of strategic thinking that makes chess look like checkers. He's been building this organisation for decades. He's got commanders stationed across all 4 blues in the Grand Line. He's got intelligence networks, supply chains, ideological frameworks, the whole apparatus of revolution. But Dragon doesn't do field work anymore. Dragon is the symbol, the face, the name that makes world government officials sweat through their suits. When Dragon personally shows up somewhere, it's a statement. It's escalation. For the day-to-day operations, for the actual revolutionary work of destabilizing governments and liberating kingdoms and recruiting disillusioned Marines, Dragon relies on his subordinates. Chief among those subordinates, the Chief of Staff. In canon, Complete Sabo fills this role with devastating effectiveness. He's the one who coordinates the commanders. He's the one who takes Dragon's strategic visions and translates them into actionable operations. He's the bridge between Dragon's grand designs and the boots on the ground. And he does this not just because he's competent, but because he believes. Because he knows, in his bones, why freedom matters. Because he has memories of the Grey Terminal and the fire and the system that tried to kill him for the crime of being born poor. Amnesiac Sabo can do the job. He's been doing the job for years. But there's a difference between doing a job and excelling at it. There's a difference between competent execution and inspired leadership. The commanders follow Amnesiac Sabo because he's skilled and Dragon trusts him. They would follow Complete Sabo into the gates of Marineford itself. Now let's add another factor to this calculus. Bartholomew Kuma. Chapter 593 confirms what the Straw Hats learn at Sabaody post-time skip. Kuma made a deal. He protected the Thousand Sunny for 2 years, standing guard against anyone who would threaten it because he believed in Dragon's cause. And the price he paid was his humanity. The pacifista programming gradually overwrote everything that made him Kuma. By the time Sabaody reconvenes, he's a shell, a weapon without a will. Kuma was a revolutionary commander. He was one of Dragon's most trusted operatives. And his sacrifice, his choice to give up everything for the future Dragon is building, represents a massive loss in organizational capability. The Revolutionary Army doesn't just lose Kuma's combat power, though that power was considerable. They lose his experience, his connections, his knowledge of world government operations from his time as a warlord. In canon, this loss is partially offset by Sabo's awakening. Complete Sabo, armed with the Mera no Mi and burning with purpose, can fill some of the gap Kuma left. Not all of it, but some. The Revolutionary Army takes a hit, but remains functional at a high level. In our timeline, they take the hit and have no offsetting gain. Kuma's sacrifice happens regardless. The Sunny is protected regardless. But Sabo never awakens. The Chief of Staff remains a skilled operator rather than a transformed leader. The hole in the organization stays open. Dragon adapts. Dragon always adapts. But adaptation isn't free. It costs time, resources, political capital. Operations that would have been aggressive become cautious. Timetables that were ambitious become conservative. The Revolutionary Army doesn't stop, but it slows. And here's where it matters for the grand narrative. The Reverie. The Reverie is the gathering of world leaders that happens every 4 years. Kings and queens from 50 nations come together to discuss policy, forge alliances, and pretend they have any real power compared to the celestial dragons pulling strings from above. In canon, the Revolutionary Army uses the Reverie as a flashpoint. They declare war on the celestial dragons, not the world government, but the dragons specifically. The rulers behind the rulers, the true enemy. This declaration is timed precisely. It's coordinated with actions across the globe. It's the moment Dragon steps out of the shadows and says, "We're not just resisting anymore, we're attacking." And it works, at least partially. The Revolutionary Army commanders infiltrate Mary Jewies. Sabo himself, Complete Sabo, fights Admiral Fujitora and Admiral Ryokugyu simultaneously and survives. Whatever happened during those events, and fictional pirate creator man is still being coy about the details, it shook the foundations of the world order. Now imagine that same reverie with Amnesiac Sabo leading the charge. The plan probably still happens. Dragon's been building toward this for too long to abandon it. But the execution suffers. Amnesiac Sabo is strong, but is he fight two admirals and live strong? Complete Sabo had the mera no me, and the burning certainty of a man who watched his world die in a newspaper headline. Amnesiac Sabo has pipe skills and abstract commitment to freedom. Maybe he still survives. Maybe the revolutionaries still achieve their objectives. But the margins get thinner. The casualties get higher. The outcome becomes less certain. And here's the thing about revolutionary movements. They run on momentum. They run on the belief that victory is possible, that the tide is turning, that the sacrifices mean something. A reverie operation that succeeds spectacularly is proof of concept. It tells every oppressed person in every kingdom that the world government can be challenged. A reverie operation that succeeds messily with heavy losses and uncertain outcomes tells a different story. It says the revolutionary army is dangerous but not dominant. It says resistance is possible but costly. Dragon knows this. Dragon builds his strategies around psychological warfare as much as military action. Every operation is a message. Every victory is propaganda. And in our timeline, the message coming out of the reverie is slightly muddled. The victory is real, but the cost is higher than it needed to be. The cascade continues. Fewer recruits sign up because the revolutionary army looks vulnerable. Existing members question whether the leadership knows what it's doing. Allied nations hesitate to commit resources to a cause that seems like it might fail. The erosion is gradual, almost invisible, but it compounds over time. Meanwhile, the world government gets to reframe the narrative. They can point to revolutionary casualties and say, look what happens when you challenge us. They can use the messy outcome as evidence that Dragon's movement is doomed. They can reassure wavering kingdoms that their stability, remains the only viable option. None of this destroys the revolutionary army. Dragon is too smart for that. The cause is too deeply rooted in the legitimate grievances of millions to be snuffed out by a single suboptimal operation. But it wounds them. It delays them. It makes the final confrontation with the world government harder than it needed to be. Ace's survival didn't just break Sabo. It broke the timeline's best chance for a strong revolutionary army at the moment when strength matters most. And we haven't even talked about Blackbeard yet. Which is an oversight, frankly, because Marshal D. Teach is the variable that keeps me awake at night when I'm supposed to be doing normal people things instead of theorizing about fictional pirates. Let's establish what doesn't change in our timeline. Blackbeard still kills Thatch. Blackbeard still captures Ace and hands him to the Marines. Blackbeard still shows up at Marineford with his crew of impel-down nightmares. And most importantly, Blackbeard still does the thing that no one thought was possible. Chapter 577. Whitebeard is dead. His body lies on the battlefield, riddled with wounds, finally still after decades of being the strongest man in the world. And Blackbeard, with all the ceremonial gravitas of a man ordering takeout, throws a black cloth over the corpse and does something to it. Something that involves darkness and screaming and a few minutes of the most ominous silhouette piece fictional pirate creator man has ever drawn. When Blackbeard emerges, he has two devil fruit powers. The Yami no Mi, which he murdered his crewmate to obtain, and the Gura no Mi, which he stole from a dead man's body through means that still haven't been fully explained. This happens in our timeline too. Ace being alive doesn't affect Whitebeard's death, and it doesn't affect Blackbeard's corpse theft. The Gura no Mi, the power to crack the world itself, belongs to Teach now. That particular nightmare is locked in regardless of butterflies. But here's where it gets interesting. In canon, The Mera no Mi enters circulation after Ace's death. Devil fruits, when their user dies, respawn somewhere in the world, finding a new host fruit to inhabit. Ace dies, and the Mera becomes available. Eventually, it ends up in Dressrosa, offered as a prize in Doflamingo's gladiator tournament. Sabo eats it. The fire passes from one brother to another, metaphorically and literally. In our timeline, Ace lives. The Mera no Mi stays exactly where it is, inside Portgas D Ace. It never enters circulation. It never becomes a prize. It's not available for acquisition by anyone. Now, you might think this is good news. Blackbeard can't get the Mera if Ace is still using it. One less powerful fruit in Teacher's collection. Victory for the good guys, right? Wrong. So deeply, catastrophically wrong. Because Blackbeard isn't collecting devil fruits at random. He's not grabbing whatever shiny powers cross his path like a toddler at a candy store. Blackbeard has a plan. Blackbeard has criteria. And those criteria, based on everything we've seen, prioritize fruits that synergize with his existing abilities or fill specific tactical gaps. The Mera no Mi is powerful, but it's not irreplaceable for Blackbeard's purposes. Fire is flashy. Fire is destructive. But Blackbeard already has destruction covered with the Gura no Mi. What he needs is versatility, coverage, the ability to counter threats that his current power set can't handle. So in our timeline, the Mera is off the table. Blackbeard adjusts. And the fruits he goes hunting for instead might be significantly worse for everyone. Let's talk about what Blackbeard's crew collects in canon. We know they're actively hunting powerful abilities. We know they have some mechanism for stealing or transferring devil fruits, possibly related to Teacher's unique physiology. We know they attacked Baltigo, the Revolutionary Army headquarters, and we know they've been making moves in the New World that suggest a coordinated acquisition strategy. Without the Mera as a target, that strategy shifts. Maybe Blackbeard prioritizes mythical zones. The man already understands the value of rare fruit types. A crew equipped with multiple mythical zones becomes exponentially more dangerous than a crew with one Logia fire user. Maybe he goes after the remaining ancient weapons, if any of them are connected to devil fruits. Maybe he targets specific counter abilities, fruits that would let him neutralize threats like the Admirals or the remaining Yonko. The theory engine starts spinning here, folks. What if Blackbeard, in our timeline, acquires a fruit that would let him counter Akainu's magma? What if he gets something that hard counters Kaido's dragon form? What if, by not having the easy win of the Mera available, Blackbeard is forced to think more creatively and ends up with a more dangerous collection? This is the problem with changing one variable in a system run by a strategic genius. You don't make him weaker, you make him different. And different, when you're dealing with someone as adaptable as Teach, often means worse. But it's not just about fruit collection, it's about pacing. In canon, Blackbeard's post-Marineford rise is aggressive but measured. He takes Whitebeard's territories, he establishes himself as a Yonko. He builds his power base, while the other major players are distracted by their own concerns. The Mera tournament in Dressrosa represents an opportunity he didn't even have to create. Doflamingo put the fruit up as bait, and Blackbeard presumably had operatives in place to try for it before Sabo intervened. In our timeline, there's no Dressrosa tournament for the Mera. That particular plot thread never happens. But the Dressrosa arc still occurs because Doflamingo's weapons trade and smile production aren't dependent on Ace's survival. So what replaces the Mera as the tournament prize? Doflamingo is a showman. He's not going to run a gladiator tournament without a headline, attraction. He'll find another fruit, another prize, Another reason for powerful fighters to gather in his Colosseum. And that replacement fruit might be something Blackbeard actually wants more than fire. Meanwhile, the Whitebeard remnants are playing defense instead of offense. We established this in Marco's section. They're not launching the payback war because they have Ace to protect. They're not challenging Blackbeard's expansion because they can't afford the risk. Every day they wait. Every territory they cede without a fight. Blackbeard grows stronger. Teach is patient. This is the man who spent decades on Whitebeard's ship, hiding his ambition, waiting for the exact right devil fruit to cross his path. He killed a crewmate he'd known for years without hesitation when the moment arrived. That kind of patience, combined with the breathing room the Whitebeard pirates are giving him, creates a nightmare scenario. Canon Blackbeard is dangerous. Our timeline Blackbeard might be catastrophically worse. And here's the kicker. Ace knows this. Ace knows Blackbeard better than almost anyone alive. Ace knows what Teach is capable of, what he's willing to do, how far he'll go. Ace spent time with this man. Ace trusted this man. Ace's entire presence at Marineford traces back to Blackbeard's betrayal. So Ace is out there, recovering from his wounds, watching Blackbeard claim territory that used to belong to his father's crew, and he can't do anything about it. He's too valuable to risk. He's too much of a target to go on the offensive. He has to sit there and watch while the man who killed Thatch and sold him to the Marines builds an empire on the ashes of everything Whitebeard created. That's not healing. That's not recovery. That's a slow poison called helplessness, and it's eating Ace alive from the inside. The dominoes keep falling. The dominoes keep falling. And while they fall, while Blackbeard consolidates and the Revolutionary Army struggles and the Whitebeard remnants play an impossible defensive game, Monkey D. Luffy trains. Rusakaina Island, a jungle hellscape in the Calm Belt, populated by creatures that would give lesser pirates nightmares for the rest of their abbreviated lives. Rayleigh chose this place specifically because it's terrible. Because the wildlife treats humans as snacks. Because survival here requires constant vigilance, constant growth, constant pushing against the limits of what a body can endure. In canon, this is where Luffy transforms. 2 years of one-on-one instruction with the Dark King. 2 years of fighting beasts that could kill him if he slips. 2 years of drilling hacky fundamentals until they become instinct. The Luffy who walks off this island is categorically different from the Luffy who arrived. Faster, stronger, more controlled. Capable of feats that would have seemed impossible to his pre-time skip self. The training happens in our timeline too. Same island, same instructor, same duration. On paper, everything looks identical, but Rayleigh notices the difference. The Dark King has trained exactly one person before Luffy, Goldie Roger, the man who became Pirate King, the man who laughed at Laugh-Tale and died with a smile. Rayleigh knows what it looks like when someone is training to change the world. He knows the hunger, the desperation, the absolute refusal to accept limits that characterized Roger in his youth. Canon Luffy has that hunger. Canon Luffy wakes up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, because he dreamed about magma and failing and the weight of a body going cold in his arms. Canon Luffy pushes through exhaustion because stopping means remembering, and remembering means confronting a grief he hasn't finished processing. The training isn't just preparation for him. It's therapy. It's penance. It's the only way he knows how to honor what he lost. Our Luffy sleeps peacefully. That's not a criticism. That's not a flaw. Sleeping peacefully is what healthy people do. Our Luffy has processed Marineford as a close call, a lesson learned, a reminder that the world is dangerous. He trains hard because he's Luffy, and Luffy always trains hard. He wants to get stronger because getting stronger is what pirates do. He's committed and focused and everything a good student should be. He's just not burning. Ray Lee adapts his teaching. The man didn't survive the Roger Pirate's journey by being inflexible. He meets Luffy where Luffy is, works with the motivation available, structures the training to maximize results given the circumstances. And Luffy does improve. He learns the 3 types of haki. He develops Gear 4th, or at least the foundations of it. He becomes, by any reasonable standard, one of the most dangerous fighters in his generation. But there's a ceiling. There's always a ceiling when you're training from sufficiency rather than desperation. The thing about haki is that it's tied to willpower. This isn't metaphor. This is canonical text. Armament haki manifests your spirit as armor. Observation haki extends your awareness through sheer mental discipline. Conqueror's haki projects your will onto the world itself, forcing weaker spirits to submit. These are not techniques you can learn through repetition alone. They require something deeper. They require a will that refuses to break. Canon Luffy's will was tested at Marineford and found unbreakable. He went to absolute zero, lost everything that mattered, and chose to keep going anyway. That choice, that moment of picking himself up when staying down would have been easier, forged something in him. The haki that emerges from that crucible is qualitatively different from haki developed through ordinary training. Our Luffy's will was tested and found successful. He pushed to his limits and achieved his goal. That's not nothing. That's impressive. But it's not the same. He never had to choose to keep going because he never had to confront total failure. His will is strong, but it's untested in the specific way that produces the highest levels of haki mastery. The difference might be invisible at first. 2 years pass. Luffy reunites with his crew at Sabo. He one-shots the pacifista that gave them so much trouble before the time skip. He demonstrates his new abilities with the confidence of someone who knows exactly how strong he's become. The Straw Hats are impressed. Of course they are. Their captain has grown tremendously. They've all grown tremendously. Zoro has new scars and closed eyes and an intensity that suggests Mihawk didn't go easy on him. Sanji moves differently, though he refuses to discuss what happened in the Kamabaka kingdom. Everyone has leveled up. Nobody notices that Luffy leveled up slightly less than he should have. How would they? They don't have a control group. They don't have Canon Luffy to compare against. They see their captain stronger than ever, ready to take on the new world. And they follow him because that's what Straw Hats do. The subtle deficiency in his haki bloom, the missing edge in his combat instincts. These things aren't visible on the surface. They'll become visible later. They'll become visible when Luffy faces enemies that Canon Luffy barely survived. When the margins matter. When the difference between victory and defeat is measured in fractions of willpower. But that's Saga 3's problem. For now, the Straw Hats sail into the new world. For now, they're confident and reunited and ready for adventure. Luffy probably even gets to see Ace at some point during these 2 years. Maybe they meet on some neutral island, share a meal, catch up on everything that's happened. Ace looking healthier, but haunted. Luffy looking stronger, but subtly incomplete in ways neither of them can articulate. The brothers reunited. The happy ending everyone wanted, except it's not an ending. It's a middle. And the middle is where the cracks start showing. The Whitebeard pirates are still struggling with succession. The Revolutionary Army is still operating below capacity. Blackbeard is still growing stronger every day that no one challenges him. And Luffy, surrounded by his crew and his dreams and his living brother's approval, sails toward challenges he's slightly less prepared for than he should be. The lie told everyone this timeline was better. The lie said Ace's survival fixed everything. The lie is about to meet the new world, and the new world doesn't care about comfortable narratives. Saga 2 ends here. The dominoes have fallen. The The fractures have spread through every institution and relationship we've examined. The setup is complete. Now comes the cockery. Now comes the cockery. And there's no better place to start concocting said cockery than the island where everything in canon goes absolutely sideways in the most spectacular fashion possible. Dressrosa, the kingdom of love and passion and underground gladiatorial death matches. The domain of Don Quixote do Flamingo, the heavenly demon, the man who turned a country into a toy box and a weapons factory, while somehow maintaining the public image of a benevolent king. Fictional pirate creator man spent over 100 chapters on this arc, and every single one of them was necessary because the sheer density of plot threads operating simultaneously required that kind of space to breathe. In canon, the Straw Hats arrive at Dressrosa following their alliance with Trafalgar Law. The plan is simple. Destroy the Smile Factory, take down Doflamingo, and weaken Kaido's Beast Pirates by cutting off their supply of artificial devil fruits. Standard New World power politics. Destabilize a Yonko by attacking his infrastructure. Nothing personal. Except it immediately becomes personal because Doflamingo, showman that he is, has organised a tournament. The prize, the Mera Mera no Mi, Ace's fruit, the fire that used to belong to Luffy's dead brother. This changes everything. Suddenly, the Dressrosa operation isn't just about Kaido and weapons trafficking. It's about legacy. It's about who inherits Ace's will. Luffy can't compete himself without blowing the operation's cover, but he can't walk away either. The fruit calls to him. The memory calls to him. And then Sabo appears. Complete Sabo. Memory restored Sabo. The brother Luffy thought died in childhood, standing in front of him in a Revolutionary Army uniform, crying and apologizing and explaining that he only just remembered. The emotional payload of that reunion, stacked on top of the tournament stakes, transforms Dressrosa from a strategic operation into something deeply personal for multiple characters simultaneously. Sabo enters the tournament. Sabo wins. Sabo eats the Mera Mera no Mi and inherits his brother's fire, quite literally carrying Ace's will forward. It's one of the most cathartic moments in the entire series. The flame passes. The legacy continues. Something beautiful emerges from tragedy. Now delete all of that. In our timeline, Ace is alive. The Mera Mera no Mi never enters circulation. Doflamingo can't offer it as a prize because it doesn't exist as a prize to offer. So what does he do instead? Doflamingo is not the type to cancel a spectacle just because one particular attraction became unavailable. The Corrida Coliseum exists for multiple purposes. It entertains the masses. It identifies powerful fighters who might be useful or threatening. It draws attention away from the darker activities happening beneath the surface. The tournament happens regardless of what's being offered. So he finds another fruit. Something rare. Something desirable. Something that will attract the caliber of fighters he wants competing in his arena. The question is, what fruit? The theory engine starts humming here, folks. Doflamingo has connections. He's a former celestial dragon with underground networks spanning the entire world. He traffics in weapons, information, and yes, devil fruits. Finding a replacement prize isn't difficult for someone, each with his resources. The replacement might be a powerful paramecia, something with flashy combat applications that would appeal to ambitious fighters. It might be a rare Zoan, maybe even an ancient model given Doflamingo's connections to Kaido and the Smile trade. Whatever it is, it's valuable enough to draw competitors. But here's what it's not. It's not Ace's fruit. It's not the flame that belonged to Luffy's brother. It's not the emotional lightning rod that draws Sabo out of Revolutionary Army operations and into a gladiator arena. Which means Sabo probably doesn't come to Dressrosa. Let that sink in. In canon, Sabo's appearance at Dressrosa serves multiple narrative functions. It reunites him with Luffy, It gives him the Mera. It establishes him as a major player in the current era. It provides the emotional catharsis of the ASL Brotherhood, having some form of continuation despite Ace's death. Amnesiac Sabo has no reason to be in Dressrosa. The Revolutionary Army has interests in destabilizing Doflamingo, certainly. The weapons trade affects revolutionary operations across the world. But sending your chief of staff to compete in a gladiator tournament for a devil fruit that isn't personally meaningful, that's a resource allocation question. And the answer is probably, we have better uses for Sabo's time. So Luffy arrives at Dressrosa, and there's no brother waiting for him in the Colosseum. There's no tearful reunion. There's no moment of profound healing where loss transforms into unexpected recovery. There's just the mission. Take down Doflamingo. Destroy the factory. Move on. This is objectively better for the operation. Without the Mera distraction, without the emotional complications of Sabo's appearance, Luffy can focus entirely on the strategic objectives. The plan proceeds more smoothly. Fewer variables, fewer deviations, fewer moments where personal investment overrides tactical thinking. But remember what we established about our timeline's Luffy. He's already operating with diminished emotional fuel. He's already slightly less driven than his canon counterpart. And now, he's going through one of the most grueling arcs in the series without the cathartic boost of reuniting with a lost brother. The Dressrosa operation succeeds, probably. Doflamingo goes down regardless because the core elements driving his defeat, Law's vendetta, Luffy's determination, the country's resistance, are all still present. The specifics change. The emotional tenor shifts. But the outcome lands roughly in the same place, except for one thing. In canon, the conclusion of Dressrosa establishes the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. 7 pirate crews who participated in the tournament or the Liberation pledged their allegiance to Luffy, creating an alliance of over 5,000 pirates who will come when called. This happens partly because of the direct actions Luffy takes, but also because of the symbolic weight of what happened. Sabo eating the Mera, the flame being passed, the sense that something meaningful was being preserved. Our timeline's Dressrosa is just a victory. An impressive victory, certainly. Luffy defeats a warlord and liberates a kingdom. But it lacks the poetry. It lacks the sense of inherited will and continuing legacy that makes people want to follow you into the unknown. The Grand Fleet probably still forms. Fighters who witnessed Luffy's strength and character would still be moved to follow him. But the bonds might be slightly weaker. The commitment slightly less total. The fleet arrives when called because they owe Luffy a debt, not because they believe in him with the fervour of people who witnessed a prophecy unfolding. And then there's the matter of what Sabo is doing instead. If he's not in Dressrosa, where is he? Revolutionary Army business, presumably. Operations that don't require him to be in a gladiator ring fighting for a fruit he doesn't personally care about. Maybe he's at Baltigo. Maybe he's coordinating commanders. Maybe he's preparing for the Reverie operation that will come later. Or maybe, in his spare moments, he's reading about Monkey D. Luffy's exploits and feeling something he can't quite explain. A resonance. A familiarity. Something that tugs at the walls in his mind-brain without quite breaking through. The tragedy of amnesiac Sabo isn't that he's inactive. It's that he's so close to himself without ever quite arriving. Dressrosa ends. The Straw Hats move on, and the divergences keep compounding. Dressrosa ends. The Straw Hats move on, and the divergences keep compounding. But if Dressrosa was a ripple, Whole Cake Island is a tidal wave. Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom, the Iron Grandmother of the New World, a woman whose hunger for power is matched only by her literal hunger, which has been known to level cities and murder her own children when insufficiently satisfied. In the grand hierarchy of people you do not want angry at you, Big Mom occupies a tier usually reserved for natural disasters and fictional pirate creator man when you ask about Crocodile's secret past. In canon, the whole Cake Island arc hinges on a specific set of political circumstances. Big Mom wants the Vinsmoke family's cloning technology. The Vinsmokes want Big Mom's protection and prestige. The solution is a political marriage between Sanji, the disowned third son, and Pudding, the 35th daughter. Everyone pretends this is a romantic union while secretly planning to murder each other at the reception. Standard One Piece wedding stuff. But the political logic underlying this arrangement depends on the state of the world at the time. Big Mom is consolidating power. She's building alliances and absorbing useful bloodlines into her family tree, because that's how she operates. Every marriage is a merger. Every child is a potential asset. The woman runs her territory like a corporation with a terrifyingly literal interpretation of family business. Now consider what's different in our timeline. The Whitebeard pirates still exist. Not in their prime, certainly. Not with Pops at the helm. But they exist as a functional organization, defending territory, projecting power, maintaining the network of alliances and protectorates that Whitebeard built over decades. Marco is doing his impossible job. Ace is a complicating factor. The crew is wounded but not destroyed. In canon, Whitebeard's death and the subsequent dissolution of his crew created a massive power vacuum. Territories that were untouchable became available. Islands that flew the Whitebeard flag suddenly needed new protectors. Big Mom, Kaido and Blackbeard all rushed to fill that vacuum, grabbing as much as they could before their rivals got there first. Big Mom's aggressive expansion during this period, her willingness to pursue alliances like the Vinsmoke marriage, stems partly from urgency. The pie is being divided. If she doesn't move quickly, she gets a smaller slice. Every alliance, every marriage, every absorbed kingdom is a play in a game where hesitation means losing ground to her fellow emperors. Our timeline has less urgency. The vacuum is smaller. The Whitebeard remnant still controls significant territory. The scramble is less desperate because there's less unclaimed ground to scramble for. Big Mom is still expanding, still pursuing power, still being Big Mom. But the calculus shifts slightly. She has more time to be selective. She can afford to wait for better opportunities rather than grabbing whatever's available. Does she still want Germa's cloning technology? Almost certainly. That technology is valuable regardless of timeline. An army that can be grown in vats, soldiers who feel no pain and follow orders without question. That's useful whether you're racing against other Yonko or consolidating at a measured pace. But does she need it as desperately? Does she need to lock down the Vinsmoke alliance right now, this year, before someone else gets to them? Maybe not. Here's where the butterfly starts flapping in earnest. If Big Mom's timeline for the Vinsmoke alliance shifts even slightly, if the wedding happens a year later, or the negotiations take longer, then Sanji's story changes. The invitation that pulls him away from the Straw Hats comes at a different moment. The crew's journey through the New World hits different beats at different times. In canon, Whole Cake Island happens when it happens because the plot threads align. Sanji's family drama intersects with Big Mom's ambitions, intersects with the Straw Hats' trajectory at a specific point in the narrative. Change any element and the intersection moves. But let's assume the arc still happens in roughly the same form. Let's assume Big Mom still pursues Germa, still arranges the marriage, still brings Sanji into her web of confectionery and betrayal. Even then, the context has shifted. Big Mom's primary concern in canon is consolidation. She's building towards something. The road, poneglyphs, laugh tale, the One Piece itself. Every move she makes is in service of eventually claiming the title of Pirate King for herself or her family. In our timeline, that goal is complicated by the Whitebeard remnants. Big Mom isn't just competing against Kaido and Blackbeard and the emerging worst generation. She's competing against a wounded but functional Emperor-level crew that still holds key territory and still possesses the institutional knowledge of decades sailing the new world. And she knows about Ace. Everyone knows about Ace. The son of Roger sailing under the banner of Whitebeard's legacy. The man the world government failed to execute despite throwing everything they had at the problem. Ace is a symbol now in ways he wasn't before Marineford. He's proof that the old era isn't quite dead. He's a reminder that bloodlines matter, that inherited will is real, that the son of the Pirate King walks the same seas as everyone else. Big Mom has complicated feelings about Roger. This is canon. She was present at God Valley. She fought alongside Whitebeard and Kaido as part of the Rocks Pirates before that crew imploded. She watched Roger rise and fall and leave behind a legacy that still shapes the world. And now that legacy has a living representative who keeps escaping death. Does this make her more cautious about antagonizing the Whitebeard remnants? Does she factor Ace into her strategic calculations in ways that affect how she pursues her goals? The woman isn't stupid. She survived as an emperor for decades by understanding power dynamics. A wounded Whitebeard crew is still dangerous. A wounded Whitebeard crew with Roger's son is a wild card she might prefer not to provoke unnecessarily. So maybe the Whole Cake Island arc plays out similarly on the surface, but the undertones differ. Big Mom is more careful. Her trap is more thorough. She's not just trying to eliminate the Vinsmokes and absorb their technology. She's positioning herself for a new world where the Whitebeard remnants remain a factor, where Ace might someday need to be dealt with, where the balance of power is more complicated than it was in canon. Luffy still crashes the wedding. Luffy still fights his way through an army of homies and children with bounties in the hundreds of millions. The crew still escapes, probably because they're the Straw Hats and escaping impossible situations is their core competency. But the victory feels different, less definitive, more like a single battle in an ongoing war rather than a decisive blow against a major enemy. Big Mom isn't humiliated the same way because she wasn't overextended the same way. Her pursuit of the Straw Hats after the arc might be more sustained, more methodical, more dangerous. And then there's Katakuri, the strongest sweet commander, the man with the mochi and the future sight and the unblemished record. In canon, Luffy's fight against Katakuri is transformative. It pushes him to develop advanced observation haki under pressure. It forces him to evolve or die. It's exactly the kind of crucible that produces growth. Our Luffy faces the same fight. Our Luffy has the same potential. But does he have the same capacity to push through when everything is on the line? Does the Luffy who never fully broke have the desperation necessary to break through his own limits? That fight might go differently. And if it goes differently, everything after it goes differently too. The mochi is the same. The mirror world is the same. The stakes appear identical. But the man fighting is just a little bit less. But the man fighting is just a little bit less. And nowhere does that less matter more than in the country where fire has always meant hope. Wano, the isolated nation, the land of samurai and shogun, and a 20-year prophecy waiting to unfold. In canon, the Wano arc is the culmination of storylines that fictional pirate creator man has been planting since Punk Hazard. Kaido's Beast Pirates, the Smile Operation, the samurai who travelled through time, the inherited will of Kazuki Oden. Everything converges on this one country for 150 chapters of the most densely plotted storytelling in the series. But here's what the fandom sometimes forgets in the midst of all that plot density. Ace was there first. Chapter 910 through 912. The flashback. Ace washes up on Wano's shores, hungry and reckless and utterly himself. He meets a little girl named Tama. He eats her rice even though she's starving. And then, because he's Ace and Ace makes promises like other people make small talk, he tells her he'll come back. He tells her that one day he'll take her away from this country where she can't eat her fill. He gives her hope, tangible and specific, in the form of a promise from a pirate. He never comes back. In canon, Ace dies at Marineford, and that promise dies with him. Tama waits. Tama believes. Tama survives on the memory of a pirate who was kind to her once, and when Luffy arrives wearing Ace's legacy in the form of the straw hat and the inherited will of the brother she never knew he had, she attaches herself to him, like he's the promise finally being kept. It's heartbreaking and beautiful, and exactly the kind of emotional through-line that makes Wano work despite being approximately 47,000 chapters long. Now Ace is alive. The promise isn't dead. The promise is walking around the new world, protecting himself and his crew, carrying survivor's guilt and a target on his back. And somewhere in Wano, a little girl is still waiting for him to come back. Does he know? He must know. Ace isn't the type to forget a promise, especially not one made to a starving child. The question isn't whether he remembers Tama. The question is whether he can do anything about it. Wano is closed. Wano has been closed for decades, ever since Kaido and Orochi seized power and turned the country into a weapons factory. Getting in isn't easy. Getting in without drawing Kaido's attention is nearly impossible. And Ace, in our timeline, is exactly the kind of high-profile target that would make Kaido sit up and take notice. Because Kaido knows Ace too. Or rather, Kaido knows of Ace, the son of Roger, the man Whitebeard protected, the symbol of inherited bloodlines and the will of D. The kind of challenge Kaido has been waiting for since he decided that dying gloriously was the only thing left worth pursuing. If Ace shows up in Wano, Kaido comes for him. Not eventually. Not when convenient. Immediately. With everything. The beast pirates would descend on Roger's son like a hurricane, and whatever rescue operation Ace intended for Tama would become a war. So, Ace stays away. Ace has to stay away. Marco is probably explicit about this during their strategic discussions. They can't afford to provoke Kaido. They can't afford to open a second front when they're still struggling to maintain what they have. Wano will have to wait. Tama will have to wait. And Ace, the man who never learned to leave well enough alone, has to live with the knowledge that a little girl is starving in a country he promised to save. This eats at him. It has to eat at him. We've established that Ace is already drowning in survivor's guilt over Whitebeard's death. Add to that the awareness that his continued existence, his status as a target, is preventing him from keeping promises to people who have nothing. The moist cry cow levels are reaching critical mass here. Ace isn't just grieving, he's being paralysed by his own survival. But wait, there's another connection we need to address. Yamato, Kaido's son, or daughter, depending on which translation you're reading and how charitable you're feeling toward fictional pirate creator man's handling of gender identity. The person who read Oden's journal became obsessed with Oden's dream and has been waiting for Luffy's arrival as the fulfillment of prophecy. Chapters 999 through 1000. The flashback within the flashback. Ace arrives in Wano, makes his way to Onigashima, and somehow encounters Yamato. They fight. They talk. They form a connection based on mutual interest in freedom and adventure and punching things. Ace tells Yamato about his little brother, the one who's going to be Pirate King. Yamato files this information away and spends years waiting for that little brother to arrive. In canon, this meeting is pure setup. Ace plants the seed, Luffy reaps the harvest. The connection between Yamato and Luffy is forged before they ever meet because of a dead man's words. In our timeline, that dead man is alive. So what happens when Yamato learns that Ace survived Marineford? What happens when the person who told her about Luffy, who sparked her interest in the future Pirate King, is still out there sailing the seas? Does Yamato reach out? Does she try to contact Ace, to tell him about Wano's situation, to invite him back to fulfill his promise? Does she see Ace's survival as a sign that the prophesied dawn is even closer than she thought? Or does she wait for Luffy anyway? Does she hold to the specific content of Odin's journal, the prophecy that names the person who will open Wano's borders, even if Ace being alive adds new variables to the equation? The answer probably depends on logistics more than emotion. Yamato is trapped on Onigashima. She's been trapped there for years, wearing explosive handcuffs that prevent her from leaving. Contacting Ace would require resources and connections she doesn't have. So she waits. She hopes. And she wonders if the man who told her about Luffy is ever going to come back himself. Now let's fast forward to the Wano liberation itself. In canon, the alliance that takes down Kaido consists of the Straw Hats, the Heart Pirates, the Samurai Retainers, the Mink Tribe, and various defectors and wildcards. It's a coalition built from scratch, assembled over the course of the arc, held together by shared enemies and inherited will. In our timeline, there's another potential faction, the Whitebeard Remnants. Ace has history with Wano. Ace has a promise to keep. If the liberation effort is underway, if there's a real chance of opening Wano's borders and freeing its people, does Ace come? Does he bring Marco and the surviving commanders? Does the ghost of the Whitebeard pirates join the raid on Onigashima? This could tip the scales. This could make the liberation easier, more decisive, less costly in terms of allied casualties. Having even a diminished Whitebeard crew fighting alongside the Straw Hats and Samurai would change the math on every confrontation. But it could also make things more complicated. Kaido's attention would split. The Beast Pirates would recognize that they're not just fighting the new generation, but the remnants of the old. The symbolic weight of the battle shifts when Roger's son and Whitebeard's heir are both on the field. And Luffy, our Luffy with his slightly diminished haki and his untested will, might find himself sharing the spotlight in ways that affect his own growth. Does he still have his rooftop moment? Does he still awaken Gear 5th? Does he still become Joy Boy in the moment when Wano needs him most? Or does Ace's presence, helpful and well-intentioned, cast a shadow that Luffy can never quite step out of? The fire that saves Wano might not be the fire that was supposed to save it. The fire that saves Wano might not be the fire that was supposed to save it. And that sentence applies to more than just one country. Because the entire Yonko system, the balance of power that has defined the New World for decades, operates on assumptions that our timeline has quietly invalidated. Let's talk about how emperor politics actually work. The Yonko system isn't formal. There's no treaty. There's no council. There's no governing body that meets quarterly to discuss territorial boundaries and mutual non-aggression pacts. The four emperors exist as a concept because four pirates became so individually powerful that the world government couldn't remove them without unacceptable losses. It's a Cold War sustained by mutual assured destruction. Nobody moves on anybody else because moving means bleeding, and bleeding means vulnerability. And vulnerability means the other emperors or the marines pick your bones clean while you're recovering. This equilibrium depends on rough parity. 4 powers, each strong enough to destroy any single challenger, each wary enough to avoid provoking coalitions. The math only works if everyone stays in their lane. Canon Marineford broke the math. Whitebeard died. His crew fragmented. The power vacuum created by his absence sent shockwaves through every political calculation in the New World. Suddenly there weren't 4 emperors. There were 3 emperors and a massive prize waiting to be claimed. The territories Whitebeard protected became contested ground. The alliances he maintained became uncertain. The entire structure wobbled. Blackbeard filled the vacuum. He claimed Whitebeard's territory, recruited his defectors, and established himself as the 4th emperor within a year of Marineford. The system restabilized around a new configuration. Different faces, same Cold War logic. Our timeline doesn't get that clean transition. The Whitebeard pirates still exist. They're wounded, yes. They're struggling with succession, yes. But they hold territory. They project power. They maintain the deterrent effect of being a crew that can hurt you badly, even if they can't destroy you completely. The vacuum is smaller. The prize is less certain. The invitation for aggressive expansion is muted. Blackbeard still rises. We established that. He has the Gura Gura no Mi. He has his Impel Down crew. He has ambition that would make lesser megalomaniacs blush. But his rise is complicated by the Whitebeard remnants refusing to conveniently disappear. He can't simply claim their territory because they're still defending it. He can't present himself as their successor because there's already a successor, however contested, flying the Whitebeard flag. So Blackbeard adapts. He expands in other directions. He targets weaker prey. He builds his power base through means that don't require direct confrontation with Marco and company. This makes him more patient, more calculating, potentially more dangerous in the long run. But it also means the Yonko balance of our timeline looks fundamentally different. Instead of 4 emperors, we might have 5, or 4.5. Or some awkward configuration where the Whitebeard remnants occupy a quasi-emperor status without the formal recognition. They're not strong enough to be treated as equals by Kaido and Big Mom, but they're too strong to be ignored or steamrolled. They exist in a liminal space that complicates everyone's planning. Kaido hates this. The man wants war. The man wants the greatest conflict the world has ever seen. The man has been preparing for a final confrontation, stockpiling weapons and smile users, and waiting for the moment when everything aligns for maximum carnage. The Whitebeard remnants represent a variable he didn't plan for. A faction that's neither ally nor enemy, neither threat nor asset, just sitting there, being inconvenient. And they have Ace. We keep coming back to this because it keeps mattering. Ace is the son of Gold D. Roger. Kaido was present at God Valley. Kaido watched Roger's era rise and fall. Kaido has feelings about inherited will and the bloodlines of legends, feelings that manifest as obsessive interest in acquiring powerful subordinates and testing himself against worthy opponents. Does Kaido want to fight Ace? Almost certainly. The chance to battle Roger's son, to measure himself against the next generation of that bloodline, would appeal to everything in Kaido's psychology. But fighting Ace means fighting the Whitebeard remnants. And fighting the Whitebeard remnants means potentially weakening himself before the real war he's planning. So Kaido waits. Kaido bides his time. Kaido continues building his beast pirates and manufacturing his artificial devil fruits and doing whatever Baroque thing he's doing with Yamato. The timeline shifts not because events change, but because the pacing changes. Everyone is a little more cautious. Everyone is a little less willing to make the first move. Big Mum feels this too. Chapter 954 through 958. The revelation of the Rocks Pirates. The crew that preceded all of this, the alliance of future emperors that terrorized the seas before God Valley brought them down. Big Mom, Kaido, and Whitebeard all served under Rox D. Zabek. They have history. They have grudges. They have complicated feelings about each other that make simple alliance or simple enmity equally impossible. In canon, Big Mom and Kaido form an alliance specifically because the power vacuum demands it. The world is shifting. The worst generation is rising. The old guard needs to consolidate or risk being overwhelmed by the new. Their temporary partnership makes strategic sense, given the circumstances. In our timeline, the circumstances are different. The Whitebeard remnants provide a buffer. The urgency is reduced. Big Mom might not need Kaido's alliance as desperately, or she might need it for different reasons, or the terms of the alliance might shift in ways that affect how the Onigashima raid plays out. The Rox parallel gets muddier here. In canon, there's a poetic symmetry to the final war. The children of Rox crew members facing off against each other. Luffy, son of Dragon who fought against Rox. Blackbeard, possible inheritor of Rox will. Kaido and Big Mom, actual Rox veterans. The thematic resonance is clean and satisfying. Our timeline complicates that resonance by adding Ace, the son of the man who ended the Rox pirates at God Valley. Roger's bloodline, present and active, participating in conflicts that echo his father's greatest battle. Does this enhance the thematic weight or dilute it? Does Ace's presence make the Rox parallel more meaningful or less? Fictional pirate creator man would probably find a way to make it work. He's done more with less. But we're not in his timeline. We're in ours. And our timeline has to grapple with the narrative awkwardness of a living symbol who doesn't quite fit the story being told. The Yonko balance in our timeline is unstable in different ways than canon. More players, more variables, more potential for unexpected coalitions and sudden betrayals. The final war, when it comes, won't look like the final war Kaido imagined. It won't look like anything anyone imagined. And in the middle of all this political reshuffling, Blackbeard is still moving, still acquiring, still building towards something that nobody else fully understands. The theory engine tells us that patient monsters are the most dangerous kind. Blackbeard has been given time by circumstance. What he does with that time will define whether our timeline is merely worse than canon or catastrophically so. The board is set. The pieces are moving. And nobody, not even the man on the internet with his conspiracy corkboard and his obsessive note-taking, can predict exactly how this game ends. But we can make educated guesses. And those guesses start with Blackbeard's alternative ascension. But we can make educated guesses. And those guesses start with Blackbeard's alternative ascension. So strap in, folks. The theory engine is fully operational now. We're about to concoct some weapons-grade cockery. Marshall D teaches, without question, the most dangerous person in the One Piece world who isn't currently sitting on the empty throne. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't hype. This is a cold assessment of what we know about the man's capabilities, his ambitions, and his willingness to do whatever it takes to achieve them. In canon, Blackbeard's power accumulation follows a specific trajectory. The Yami Yami no Mi, acquired through murdering a crewmate. The Gura Gura no Mi, stolen from Whitebeard's corpse. His crew, recruited from the worst inmates of Impel Down. His territory, claimed from the vacuum left by Whitebeard's death. Each acquisition builds on the last. Each step makes the next step easier. The Mera no Mi, in canon, never actually joins Blackbeard's collection. Sabo gets there first, but the fruit was clearly on Blackbeard's radar. He sent Burgess to compete in the Dressrosa tournament. He wanted that fire. The question is, Why? The obvious answer is power. Fire is destructive. Fire is flashy. Fire would give his crew another Logia user with widespread combat applications. But the obvious answer rarely captures the full picture when we're talking about teach. Blackbeard is a collector, but he's not collecting at random. Every ability he acquires serves a purpose. The Yami Yami lets him nullify other devil fruit powers. The Gura Gura lets him create earthquakes and tsunamis. Together, they give him both offense and defense against virtually any ability-based opponent. He can hit you with devastating force, and if you try to hit back with your fruit, he can turn it off. The Mera Mera would have added range and versatility. Fire attacks from a distance. Fire creates area denial. Fire synergizes with darkness in thematically satisfying ways that fictional pirate creator man would absolutely exploit. But fire isn't irreplaceable. There are other fruits that could fill similar tactical gaps. So in our timeline, where the Mera Mera stays attached to Ace, Blackbeard pivots. He has to pivot. The man doesn't waste time mourning closed doors when there are windows to smash. Here's where the theory engine really starts humming. What fruits would Blackbeard prioritize in a timeline where the Mera Mera is unavailable? Option 1. Another powerful Logia. The Pika Pika no Mi is off the table since Kizaru has it. The Haie Haie no Mi is theoretically available after Aokiji leaves the Marines, but Aokiji is both alive and allied with Blackbeard in some capacity, so that's complicated. The Magu Magu belongs to Akainu, and even Blackbeard probably isn't crazy enough to try harvesting that one from a living fleet admiral. But there are Logias we haven't seen yet. Logias that might exist in corners of the world. Blackbeard's network can access. A forest fire Logia. A sand Logia, if Crocodile ever becomes vulnerable. Something that provides the range devastation he was looking for with fire. Option 2. Mythical zones. And this is where my mind brain starts doing uncomfortable backflips. Because mythical zones are fruit for fruit, possibly the most powerful category in the entire devil fruit taxonomy. Marco's Phoenix, Kaido's Dragon, Sengoku's Buddha. Each of these grants not just transformation, but additional supernatural abilities. Regeneration, weather manipulation, shockwaves. The ceiling on mythical zones is absurdly high. Canon Blackbeard has mythical zones in his crew already. The Vivre Cards confirm that several of his commanders ate fruits acquired during their post-Marineford expansion. In our timeline, with more time and different targets, that mythical Zoan collection might be larger. It might include fruits we haven't seen yet. It might include something truly nightmarish. Imagine a Blackbeard Pirates where Burgess doesn't lose to Sabo in Dressrosa, where he acquires whatever replacement fruit Doflamingo offers instead, where that fruit is a mythical Zoan, because Doflamingo, ever the showman, wants his tournament prize to be appropriately spectacular. What mythical Zoans are still unaccounted for in canon? We don't know, because fictional pirate creator man plays his cards close to his chest on this stuff, but the possibilities are terrifying. A Cerberus Zoan, which would explain Blackbeard's multiple devil fruit capacity if the theories about his body are correct. A Hydrazoan, regenerating and multiplying. A Phoenix variant. That's different from Marco's. Anything from any mythology that Oda hasn't explicitly ruled out. Option 3. Ancient weapons adjacent fruits. This one is pure speculation, but follow the logic. Blackbeard wants power. Ultimate power. The kind of power that lets you challenge the entire world order and win. Ancient weapons represent exactly that kind of power. We know Poseidon is Shirahoshi. We know Pluton is in Wano. We don't know what Uranus is or where it is. What if Uranus is connected to a devil fruit? What if there's an ability out there that grants control over weather at a continental scale, or dominion over sea kings, or something else we haven't conceived of? Blackbeard would know about this. The man spent decades on Whitebeard's ship, listening to conversations, gathering intelligence, learning secrets. If there's even a rumour of an ancient weapon fruit, Blackbeard would chase it. And he has time in our timeline. That's the killer variable. Every month the Whitebeard remnants spend on defense instead of offense. Every year Luffy spends developing slightly less efficiently than he should. Every delay in the confrontations that would otherwise check Blackbeard's expansion teach uses for accumulation. His crew grows stronger. His territory grows larger. His fruit collection grows more terrifying. By the time the final war arrives in our timeline, we might not be facing the Blackbeard pirates we know from canon. We might be facing something worse. Something that's had years of additional preparation. Something that's filled the gaps in its arsenal with abilities specifically chosen to counter the threats Blackbeard anticipates. Because Blackbeard plans. That's the thing people forget about him. The man looks like a buffoon. He acts like a buffoon. He laughs too loudly and dreams too openly, and seems like exactly the kind of overconfident pirate who should have been killed years ago. But he's survived everything. He's outmaneuvered everyone. He's positioned himself to potentially win the entire game, while his opponents are still arguing about the rules. In our timeline, Blackbeard is playing the same game. He's just playing it with a slightly different hand. And a different hand, for someone as adaptable as Teach, might mean a better hand. The Mirror stays with Ace. That's supposed to be a victory. That's supposed to mean the good guys kept something valuable out of enemy hands. But what if the fruit Blackbeard acquires instead is worse? What if the absence of an easy target forced him to hunt harder and find something more dangerous? What if saving Ace's fire gave Blackbeard the motivation to find a different kind of flame entirely? The darkness has been patient. The darkness has been accumulating. And when the darkness finally moves, when Blackbeard reveals the full scope of what he's built in the shadows of our alternate timeline, everyone is going to wish that all he had was fire. Saga 3 ends here. The new era has been established. The cockery has been concocted. The board is set for the final game. And the final game is going to hurt. And the final game is going to hurt. That's not pessimism. That's not dramatic framing for entertainment purposes. That's the cold calculus of everything we've established across 15 sections of alternate timeline analysis. The final war is coming. It's always been coming. From the moment fictional pirate creator man introduced the concept of the void century, the moment he established that the world government is built on lies and the erasure of history, the moment he made clear that One Piece isn't just treasure but truth, the endgame has been inevitable. Everything is building toward a confrontation between the forces that want the world to remain as it is and the forces that want the dawn. In canon, that confrontation has a specific shape. Luffy, fully realised as Joy Boy, carrying the accumulated will of everyone who came before him. The Revolutionary Army, battered but purposeful, striking at the heart of celestial dragon power. The remnants of the old era, Marines who've questioned their orders, pirates who found common cause, all converging on a final battle that will determine the fate of the world. It's going to be brutal. It's going to cost lives. But there's a sense, reading through the narrative threads Oda has been weaving, that the dawn is coming. That the good guys, however you define them, have what they need to win. Our timeline doesn't have that assurance. Let's take inventory. Let's lay out exactly what the forces of liberation are working with in our alternate history and compare it to what they should have. First, Monkey D. Luffy. We've beaten this drum across multiple sections, but it bears one final examination before the endgame. Canon Luffy arrives at the final war as the man who defeated Kaido. The man who awakened a mythical Zoan that hadn't been awakened in 800 years. The man who became Joy Boy, literally, in the moment when Wano needed him most. That Luffy has been tested to destruction and come back stronger every single time. His haki is forged in absolute extremity. His will is unbreakable because it's already been broken and rebuilt. Our Luffy is never fully broken. The implications cascade. His haki development is slightly shallower. His combat instincts are slightly less honed. His capacity to push through when all hope seems lost is slightly less proven. In a war where margins matter, where the difference between victory and defeat might come down to a single moment of transcendent willpower, our Luffy is operating with a handicap he doesn't even know he has. Second, the Revolutionary Army. Canon Sabo enters the final conflict as a complete person. Memory restored, identity integrated, carrying Ace's fire both metaphorically and literally. He's one of the most dangerous fighters on the revolutionary side, capable of standing against admirals and surviving. The Revolutionary Army's operations have him at full capacity, coordinating strategies and leading critical missions. Our Sabo remains hollow, competent but incomplete. The Reverie operation went worse than it should have. The recruitment numbers are lower. The institutional confidence is shaken. Dragon is still Dragon, still brilliant, still committed. But he's working with a blunted instrument where he should have a razor. Third, the Whitebeard remnants. This one is complicated. In canon, the Whitebeard pirates don't exist as a faction by the time of the final war. They dissolved. The survivors scattered. Marco shows up periodically as an ally, but not as a commander of forces. Our timeline has the remnants intact. That's bodies. That's fighters. That's institutional experience sailing the new world. On paper, this looks like an advantage. More allies for the final confrontation. More power on the side of liberation. Except those remnants are tired. They've spent years playing defense. They've watched their territory erode while protecting Ace. They've lost commanders to attrition and despair. The crew that shows up to the final war isn't the Whitebeard pirates of old. It's the ghost of the Whitebeard pirates, held together by loyalty and stubbornness rather than strength and hope. And they bring Ace. Ace, who is still a target. Ace, who draws world government attention wherever he goes. Ace, whose presence at the final war gives Akainu, specifically, a reason to fixate. We established early in this script that Akainu's failure to kill Ace at Marineford was a wound to his ideology. That wound has been festering for years. When Akainu sees Ace on the battlefield of the final war, everything else becomes secondary. The fleet admiral hunting Roger's son across the battlefield isn't an asset for the liberation forces. It's a liability, shaped like a person. Fourth, Blackbeard. We just spent an entire section on this, but let's crystallize it. Canon Blackbeard is terrifying. Our timeline's Blackbeard might be worse. Different fruits, different strategies, different crew composition. Years of additional accumulation while his enemies were distracted. The man enters the final war as a wildcard, and wildcards don't respect narrative convenience. Now let's talk about what the final war actually looks like with these forces. The world government fields the Marines, the Cypher Pole agencies, the remaining warlords, or whatever system has replaced them, and the ultimate weapons they've been holding in reserve. The Gorosei. The full power of an 800-year-old regime that has survived everything the world has thrown at it. Against this, a weaker Luffy, a fractured revolutionary army, exhausted Whitebeard remnants, and the alliance of pirates and nations that the Straw Hats have assembled across their journey. The balance tilts. In canon, the forces of liberation probably win. The narrative weight is on their side. The inherited will of centuries is on their side. The prophecy is on their side. One Piece is a story about freedom triumphing over tyranny, and stories like that tend to end with freedom winning. Our timeline isn't a story, it's a what if. And what ifs don't have narrative weight guaranteeing their outcomes. What ifs play out according to the cold logic of the variables we've established. Can our forces win? Yes. Victory isn't impossible. Luffy is still Luffy. The alliance is still formidable. The world government has weaknesses that can be exploited. Nothing is determined absolutely. But the margins are thinner. The cost will be higher. The casualties will be worse. Where canon might achieve a decisive victory that reshapes the world, our timeline might achieve a Pyrrhic victory that limps toward the dawn with half its forces dead and its symbols shattered. Or our timeline might lose. That's the possibility we have to sit with. That's the implication of everything we've analysed. A timeline where Ace survives Marineford is not automatically a timeline where the good guys prevail. It's a timeline where the butterfly effect compounds across years and continents, weakening the forces of liberation in ways that might prove fatal when the final test comes. The final war begins, the armies clash. And somewhere on that battlefield, Luffy faces a challenge that canon Luffy might have overcome, but our Luffy might not. The question isn't whether he fights. The question is whether Joy Boy shows up. The question isn't whether he fights. The question is whether Joy Boy shows up. And that question, folks, is the theological core of this entire alternate timeline exercise. Chapter 1043. The Moment. Luffy lies defeated on the roof of Onigashima, beaten by Kaido, seemingly dead. The drums of liberation begin. The heartbeat that echoes across 800 years starts pounding. Zunesha, the ancient elephant condemned to walk the seas for eternity, raises its trunk and speaks the words that reframe everything we thought we knew about this story. Joy Boy has returned. In canon, this moment is the culmination of everything. Every trial Luffy has faced, every loss he's endured, every time he's been pushed to his absolute limit and somehow found more, all of it converges in the awakening of the Hito Hito no Mi, model, Nika, the sun god, the liberator, the warrior of legend who fought for freedom 8 centuries ago and promised to return. The mechanics of Devil Fruit Awakening are deliberately vague in One Piece, fictional pirate creator. Man likes his power systems mysterious, prefers implications over explanations, trusts his audience to feel the logic even when it isn't spelled out. But what we can piece together suggests that awakening requires something beyond training. It requires extremity. It requires the user to push so far past their limits that the fruit itself responds, evolving to match the will of its wielder. Luffy doesn't awaken the Nika fruit because he trained really hard. He awakens it because he dies, or comes close enough to death that the distinction becomes philosophical. His heart stops, his body fails, and in that moment of absolute ending, something in him refuses to end. The drums begin. Joy Boy emerges. This is the pattern we see with other awakenings too. Doflamingo awakened his fruit after years of brutal survival post-exile from Marineford. Katakuri awakened his through a lifetime of being the perfect son, the burden crystallizing his ability into something transcendent. Law awakened the Op in a moment of desperation against Big Mom. The common thread is extremity. The common thread is being pushed to a point where normal limits become irrelevant, because the alternative is oblivion. Canon Luffy, has been pushed to that point repeatedly. Marineford broke him. The 2-year training rebuilt him with the memory of that breaking as foundation. Every subsequent challenge, from Doflamingo to Katakuri to Kaido, added layers to a will that was forged in absolute loss. By the time he reaches Onigashima's roof, Luffy has been tempered so thoroughly that his spirit can survive what his body cannot. Our Luffy is never fully broken. We keep returning to this because it keeps mattering. The man on Onigashima's roof in our timeline is strong. He's capable. He's pushed himself hard and grown tremendously, but his will has never been tested to destruction. He's never experienced the complete collapse that forces reconstruction. He's a blade that's been sharpened but never reforged. So what happens when Kaido defeats him? Because Kaido will defeat him. That confrontation is coming regardless of timeline variations. Luffy will challenge the strongest creature in the world, and Luffy will lose the first round. That's the narrative structure. That's how Kaido fights work. You don't beat the dragon on your first attempt. In canon, that defeat triggers the awakening. The drums. Joy Boy. Gear 5th, and the cartoonish godhood that comes with it. Luffy gets back up because something in him, something that transcends his individual will and connects to 800 years of inherited purpose, refuses to stay down. Our Luffy gets knocked down. Our Luffy's heart might stop. Our Luffy lies there on the roof with Kaido standing over him and the Alliance's hopes crumbling. Do the drums start? This is where the man on the internet has to engage in some genuine theological speculation about the nature of inherited will in One Piece. Because Joy Boy isn't just a title. Joy Boy isn't just a previous user of the Nika fruit. Joy Boy is something like a spiritual office, a role that exists independently of its occupant, waiting to be filled by someone worthy. The question is, what makes someone worthy? If worthiness is about potential, about having the right spirit and the right dreams, then our Luffy qualifies. He's still the man who wants to be Pirate King. He's still the man who punched a celestial dragon without hesitation. He's still carrying the straw, hat and the will of Shanks and Roger and everyone else who touched that hat before him. But if worthiness requires tempering, if the vessel has to be prepared through specific kinds of suffering before it can hold the flame of Joy Boy, then our Luffy might not qualify. He might be the right shape without the right composition. A cup that looks correct but cracks when you pour in the fire. Zunesha would know. The ancient elephant has been waiting 800 years for Joy Boy's return. It recognized Canon Luffy in that moment of death and resurrection. Would it recognize our Luffy? Would it hear the drums starting? Or would it hear silence where the heartbeat should be? The terrifying possibility is that the drums don't start. That our Luffy lies on that roof, defeated and dying, and nothing transcendent intervenes. That he's simply a very strong pirate who reached the end of his strength and found that it wasn't enough. Without Gear 5th, Luffy cannot beat Kaido. This isn't speculation. This is demonstrated in canon. Base Luffy, Gear 2nd Luffy, Gear 3rd Luffy, even Gear 4th Luffy, none of them are sufficient. The awakening is required. The transformation is mandatory. If our Luffy can't access that transformation, the raid fails. If the raid fails, Wano isn't liberated. If Wano isn't liberated, the ancient weapon Pluton remains sealed. If Pluton remains sealed, the final war against the world government proceeds without one of the 3 weapons that might be necessary to break their power. The dominoes fall in a new direction, backwards, toward darkness. But let's consider a more hopeful possibility. Let's say the drums do start. Let's say Joy Boy recognizes our Luffy, despite his incomplete tempering, because potential matters more than preparation. Because the will of D is stronger than the specific traumas that shaped its carriers. Even then we have a problem. Canon Gear 5th Luffy fights with joy. That's the point. That's the transformation's essence. He becomes the warrior of liberation, not through rage or desperation, but through absolute transcendent joy. He laughs while fighting Kaido. He turns the battle into play. He embodies freedom so completely that reality itself bends around his will. Can our Luffy access that joy as fully? The joy of Gear 5th, in canon, reads as the joy of someone who has processed grief and come out the other side. Luffy can laugh in battle because he's already cried everything he needed to cry. He can play with death because he's already held death in his arms and survived it. The lightness is earned through the darkness that preceded it. Our Luffy's joy would be different. Less hard-won, more naive. The joy of someone who hasn't fully confronted loss, rather than someone who has transcended it. Maybe that's enough. Maybe joy is joy regardless of its origins. Or maybe Gear 5th in our timeline is slightly less stable, slightly less complete. Another margin shaved off an already thin advantage. The vessel holds the flame, but the vessel has hairline cracks that only show under pressure. And the final war is nothing but pressure. And the final war is nothing but pressure. Pressure that reveals what things are made of. Pressure that tests not just strength but composition. Not just power but the purpose that power serves. And purpose, in One Piece, comes from inheritance. The will of D, that mysterious initial that marks certain individuals across the world. Goldie Roger, Portgas D, Ace, Monkey D Luffy, Marshall D Teach, Trafalgar D Waterloo. Names that span the entire spectrum of morality, from heroes to villains to everyone in between, united by a single letter that the world government fears enough to suppress. We don't know exactly what the D means. Fictional pirate creator man has been teasing this mystery for over 2 decades, dropping hints and implications without ever providing a definitive answer. But we know enough to understand that the D carries something, a legacy, a purpose, a will that passes from one generation to the next, accumulating weight with each carrier. The will of D is not just genetic, it's mimetic. It spreads through connection, through inspiration, through the act of watching someone live according to their ideals and choosing to carry those ideals forward. Roger inspired Shanks. Shanks inspired Luffy. Luffy inspires everyone he meets. The will passes not just through blood, but through witnessing. And death is the ultimate witness. This is the uncomfortable truth that our timeline has to grapple with. In One Piece, death is not just loss. Death is transmission. The moment of dying is the moment of maximum narrative weight, the point where everything a person stood for crystallizes into something that can be inherited. Roger's execution didn't end his will. It amplified it. The Pirate King dying with a smile on his face, announcing that his treasure exists and challenging the world to find it. That moment created the great pirate era. His death was the seed. Everything that followed was the growth. Whitebeard understood this. Chapter 576. The old man, standing on Marineford with hundreds of wounds, delivers his final speech. One Piece exists, 4 syllables that shake the foundations of the world order. And then he dies, standing, unbowed, having lost not a single piece of his pirate's pride. That death transmits something to everyone who witnessed it. The Marines saw it. The pirates saw it. The entire world, watching through the broadcast until Sengoku cut the feed, saw it. Whitebeard's death was a message. The old era may be ending, but its will continues. In canon, this transmission stacks on top of Ace's death. Luffy doesn't just inherit Whitebeard's final words. He inherits the specific weight of his brother dying in his arms. He inherits the responsibility of being the one Ace believed in with his final breath. He inherits the accumulated will of two men who loved him, transmitted through the most powerful medium possible, their endings. Our Luffy doesn't get that full inheritance. Whitebeard still dies. Whitebeard's final words still echo. But Ace is alive. Ace is standing next to Luffy at some point in the future, breathing and laughing and being Ace. And because Ace is alive, his will remains inside him rather than passing to someone else. This sounds like a good thing. Of course you'd rather have your brother alive than inheriting his will. Of course the living Ace is better than the memorial of a dead one. That's the human calculus. That's what anyone would choose. But inherited will doesn't work on human calculus. Inherited will works on narrative physics. And narrative physics says that the torch has to pass for the flame to grow. Think about what Ace's death gave Luffy in canon. Not just grief, not just motivation, but position. The understanding that he is now the one carrying the dreams of everyone who died believing in him. The weight of being not just himself, but the continuation of everyone who came before. That weight is heavy. That weight is crushing. But that weight is also what makes Luffy capable of facing gods and emperors without flinching. When he fights Kaido, he's not just fighting as Monkey D. Luffy. He's fighting as the inheritor of Ace's fire, of Whitebeard's era, of Roger's challenge. He's carrying centuries of accumulated will. And that accumulation gives him strength beyond what any individual could possess. Our Luffy carries less. He has his own will, certainly, his own dreams and determination, and the relentless forward momentum that has defined him since Chapter 1. But he's missing layers. He's missing the specific weight that comes from being the survivor, the inheritor, the one left behind to carry what others could not carry themselves. Ace being alive means Ace carries his own will. Ace's fire remains Ace's fire. The legacy of Roger flows through Ace, rather than through Ace to Luffy. The transmission is interrupted because the transmitter is still transmitting to himself. And here's where it gets philosophically uncomfortable. Is Luffy diminished by this? Is he objectively less than he should be because his brother survived? The man on the internet wants to say no. Wants to say that Luffy is Luffy regardless of what happens to the people around him. Wants to believe that inherited will is additive. That having Ace alive just means Luffy has an ally rather than a legacy. But the evidence in the text suggests otherwise. One Piece is a story about inheritance. About the dreams of the dead being carried by the living. About each generation building on the sacrifices of the previous one. The entire structure of the narrative depends on the idea that death creates meaning, that loss creates purpose, that the dawn requires darkness to define itself against. Our timeline has less darkness. Our Luffy has lost less. And therefore, by the brutal logic of One Piece storytelling, our Luffy carries less of the weight that might be necessary to bring the dawn. The will of D is not diluted in the sense of being polluted or weakened in quality. It's diluted in the sense of being spread thinner. Ace is alive, carrying his portion. Luffy is alive, carrying his portion. But the convergence that should happen, the moment where Luffy becomes the focal point for all the inherited will of his generation, that convergence is incomplete. Multiple carriers. Distributed weight. A will that should be concentrated in a single vessel, instead flowing through parallel channels. Maybe that's fine. Maybe distributed will is as effective as concentrated will. Maybe Ace and Luffy fighting side by side in the final war is better than Luffy fighting alone with Ace's memory burning in his heart. Or maybe the dawn requires a single sun. Maybe the prophecy of Joy Boy assumes a concentration of inherited will that our timeline cannot provide. Maybe the entire cosmology of One Piece depends on the mathematics of sacrifice and inheritance working out in specific ways, and our timeline's arithmetic doesn't reach the necessary sum. The will of D endures. It always endures. That's the point of the D. The enemies of the celestial dragons will keep emerging, generation after generation, until the injustice is finally corrected. But enduring isn't the same as triumphing. Enduring can mean waiting. Enduring can mean the dawn being delayed another generation, another century, another 800 years. In our timeline, the will of D endures. Whether it triumphs is another question entirely. Whether it triumphs is another question entirely. And that question, the real question underneath everything we've been discussing for 24,000 words, isn't about power scaling or political dynamics, or even the will of D. The real question is this: is tragedy necessary for liberation? I need to sit with this one for a moment, folks. The man on the internet has been making a specific argument throughout this entire script. The argument is that Ace's survival, despite appearing to be an unambiguous good, actually weakens the timeline's chances of achieving the dawn. That the loss of Ace in canon served a purpose. That the tragedy was, in some sense, required. This is a dangerous argument. This is the kind of argument that, taken to its logical extreme, becomes a justification for suffering. Good things require bad things to happen first is a short walk from we shouldn't prevent bad things from happening. It's the theodicy problem applied to fictional pirate narratives, and it deserves to be interrogated rather than assumed. So let's interrogate it. Position 1. Tragedy as necessity. This is the position the script has been advancing. The evidence, as I've laid it out, suggests that One Piece operates on a specific narrative logic where loss creates meaning and sacrifice creates progress. Roger had to die to start the Great Pirate Era. Whitebeard had to die to pass his will to the next generation. Ace had to die to break Luffy in a way that allowed him to be rebuilt stronger. This position finds support in the text itself. Fictional pirate creator man has structured his story around inheritance and sacrifice. The flashbacks that define major arcs, Nami's mother, Robin's scholars, Sanji's mother, Law's family, are almost universally about loss creating purpose. The characters we follow are shaped by what they've lost as much as what they've gained. From this perspective, tragedy isn't cruelty, it's transformation. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly through comfort. It becomes a butterfly through the destruction of everything it was. The cocoon isn't a shelter, it's a crucible. And Ace's death was Luffy's cocoon, the dissolving of his previous self that allowed a new self to emerge. The dawn in this reading requires darkness, not because darkness is good, but because light only means something in contrast to darkness. Freedom only means something to people who have experienced bondage. Joy only reaches its fullest expression in those who have known sorrow. The mathematics of liberation demand a deficit before they can produce a surplus. Position 2. Tragedy as contingent. But there's another way to read the same evidence. What if the tragedies in One Piece aren't necessary but merely historical? What if they're the specific path the story took rather than the only path it could have taken? Consider, Roger didn't have to die to pass on his will. He chose to die, orchestrated his own execution because he was already dying of an incurable disease. The Great Pirate Era wasn't caused by his death. It was caused by his words at the execution. The death was a platform, not a requirement. Whitebeard's death transmitted his will, yes. But Whitebeard was going to die regardless of what happened at Marineford. The man was old and sick and pushing himself beyond every reasonable limit. His death wasn't a sacrifice demanded by narrative necessity. It was the natural endpoint of a life fully lived. From this perspective, the tragedies in One Piece are historical accidents rather than cosmic requirements. They happen because the world is brutal and the powerful prey on the weak. They shape the characters because characters are shaped by their experiences. But they weren't necessary in any metaphysical sense. They were simply what occurred. If this position is correct, then our timeline's reduced tragedy isn't a weakness. It's an opportunity, a chance to see what liberation looks like when it doesn't require as much suffering to achieve. Maybe the dawn can come through abundance rather than through loss. Maybe inherited will can accumulate through inspiration rather than death. Maybe Luffy doesn't need to be broken to become Joy Boy. Maybe he just needs to be himself. So which position is correct? Here's where the man on the internet has to be honest with you. I don't know. I've spent this entire script arguing position 1 because the evidence seemed to support it. Because the narrative logic of One Piece seemed to demand it. But narrative logic isn't the same as truth. Narrative logic is a tool that storytellers use, not a law that governs reality. The uncomfortable possibility is that position 1 is cope. That's right. Cope. The thing we accuse other fans of engaging in when their theories don't hold up. The psychological defense mechanism of finding meaning in suffering, because the alternative is admitting that suffering is meaningless. Ace died in canon. That's a fact. And for 15 years, the fandom has been processing that death, finding ways to make it mean something, building elaborate theories about how it was necessary for Luffy's growth and the Dawn's arrival. What if all of that is just us refusing to accept that fictional pirate creator man made a choice that didn't have to be made? That Ace could have lived and the story could have been just as good, just different? What if I've spent 24,000 words constructing an elaborate justification for a tragedy that was ultimately contingent? This is the philosophical reckoning. Not is our timeline worse, but is there any timeline where the dawn comes without cost? Not did Ace's death serve a purpose, but do deaths ever serve purposes? Or do we just assign purposes to deaths because the alternative is unbearable? One Piece is fiction. Fictional pirate creator man makes choices about who lives and who dies based on narrative effect, not cosmic necessity. In our world, the real world, people die and it means nothing. Children starve and it serves no purpose. Injustice persists and no dawn arrives to redeem it. The idea that tragedy is necessary for liberation is a story we tell ourselves. A narrative structure we impose on chaos because structured suffering is more bearable than random suffering. But here's the thing about stories. They matter anyway. One Piece isn't just entertainment. It's a framework for understanding the world. The ideas it advances about inherited, will and freedom, and the power of dreams. Those ideas influence how millions of people think about their own lives. If One Piece says tragedy is necessary for liberation, some portion of its audience will internalize that lesson. If One Piece says tragedy is contingent, a different lesson gets learned. Fictional pirate creator man chose tragedy. He chose to have Ace die at Marineford, to break Luffy, to structure the narrative around loss and inheritance. Whether that choice was necessary or contingent in some abstract philosophical sense, it's the choice that shapes the story we have. Our alternate timeline exists in the space of, what if he chose differently? And in exploring that space, we've found that the choice has consequences, ripples that spread across years and continents, weaknesses that compound, strengths that never fully develop. Maybe those consequences prove that tragedy was necessary. Maybe they just prove that the story was designed with tragedy as a load-bearing element and removing it causes structural problems. Either way, the story we have is the story we have, and the story we have says the dawn requires darkness. Whether that's wisdom or cope, I leave for you to decide. But we still have one section left. One final reckoning with what our timeline means. One last chance to circle back to where we started and see if anything has changed. The broken dawn awaits. The broken dawn awaits. And so we return to where we started, 25,000 words ago, staring at the single most analysed panel in One Piece history. Chapter 574. The Fist, the Whole. The moment fictional pirate creator man decided to rip out our collective hearts and show them to us, still beating, before crushing them into dust. Except in our timeline, the fist connects differently. The whole doesn't form, or forms smaller, or forms in a way that Law and Marco can fix. Ace survives. Luffy doesn't break. The war ends with one less tragedy than it was supposed to have, and everything falls apart anyway. That's the thesis we've been proving across 4 sagas and 20 sections. Not that Ace's survival is bad in some moral sense. Not that we should celebrate death or fetishize suffering, but that in the specific narrative architecture of One Piece, in the precise way fictional pirate creator man constructed his story about freedom and inherited will and the dawn of the world, Ace's death was load-bearing. Remove it, and the structure doesn't collapse immediately. It sags. It weakens. It develops cracks that spread slowly until the weight of the final war reveals just how compromised the foundation has become. Let's trace the full cascade one more time. Ace survives, and everyone thinks this is a victory. The lie takes root. The Whitebeard pirates sail away from Marineford believing they've won something, when all they've done is postpone losses while accumulating new vulnerabilities. Ace becomes a symbol everyone projects different expectations onto, a lightning rod for world government attention, a target that makes everyone standing near him less safe. Luffy recovers faster because there's less to recover from. He trains with Rayleigh, learns Haki, develops his abilities, but the fire in his belly burns cooler. The desperation that should drive him through walls is replaced by something softer, something closer to ambition than obsession. He emerges from the time skip as a formidable pirate. He does not emerge as the man forged in absolute loss who can carry the weight of Joy Boy. Sabo never remembers. The newspaper that should shatter his amnesia reports survival instead of death, and the wall in his mind-brain holds. The Revolutionary Army's Chief of Staff remains competent but hollow, a weapon rather than a person, and the Reverie operation suffers for it. Dragon adapts because Dragon always adapts, but adaptation costs resources and time and opportunities that can't be recovered. The Whitebeard remnants play defense for years, protecting Ace, maintaining what territory they can, watching Blackbeard grow stronger while they grow more exhausted. Marco does his impossible job until the job breaks him, or breaks the crew, or breaks both. The payback. War either doesn't happen, or happens from a position of weakness rather than righteous fury. Blackbeard, patient monster that he is, uses the time he's been given. The mirror stays out of his reach, so he reaches for something else. The theory engine suggests his alternative acquisitions might be worse than fire. Mythical zoans, ancient weapon-adjacent abilities, fruits we haven't imagined yet, collected by a man with decades of practice at finding exactly what he needs. Dressrosa happens without the mirror tournament. Sabo doesn't appear to reunite with Luffy. The Grand Fleet forms with slightly less fervour, bound by debt rather than destiny. Whole Cake Island plays out, against a shifted political backdrop. Big Mom's calculations adjusted for a world where the Whitebeard remnants still exist as a factor. Wano calls to Ace through promises he made to a starving girl. Promises he can't keep without drawing Kaido's attention. Promises that poison him with helplessness, even as his survival is supposedly a blessing. The Yonko balance destabilizes differently. The Rock's parallel gets muddied. The final alliances form from positions of weakness rather than strength. And through it all, Luffy advances toward the confrontation that will determine everything, carrying slightly less inherited will than he should, operating with slightly shallower haki than he needs, approaching Joy Boy's mantle as an incomplete vessel rather than a fully forged one. The final war arrives. Our forces face the world government with thinner margins and heavier costs. Luffy fights and falls, and maybe the drums start. Maybe Joy Boy recognizes him despite his incomplete tempering. Or maybe the drums stay silent. Maybe Zunesha waits and waits, and the heartbeat never comes. Maybe the dawn that was supposed to arrive in this generation gets postponed to the next one, or the one after that, or 800 more years of waiting. The will of D endures. It always endures. But enduring isn't triumphing. So here we are. At the end of a 25,000-word journey through a timeline that never happened, examining the consequences of a mercy that was never granted. What have we learned? We've learned that One Piece is a story about the mathematics of sacrifice, about the way loss creates meaning and death creates transmission and breaking, creates the possibility of being rebuilt stronger. We've learned that fictional pirate creator man, whether through intuition or design, constructed a narrative where tragedy is load-bearing, where removing the darkness doesn't just let in more light, but removes the contrast that makes light visible. We've learned that wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. That the fandom's desire for Ace to survive, however understandable, however human, runs against the grain of the story being told. That the happy ending we imagine isn't actually happy when you trace the full implications. And we've learned maybe to sit with the discomfort of that, to accept that the story we have is the story we have. And that story includes a hole in a young man's chest and a brother crying in the ashes of his failure. To find meaning not in wishing it were different, but in understanding why it is the way it is. Ace died at Marineford. That's the timeline we live in. That's the story fictional pirate creator man chose to tell. And in telling it, he made a claim about the nature of liberation, about what the dawn requires, about the cost of freedom. Our alternate timeline is the shadow of that claim, the negative space that proves the positive. By showing what happens when the tragedy doesn't occur, we illuminate why the tragedy mattered. The broken dawn still comes. I believe that. Even in our diminished timeline, even with all the weaknesses we've catalogued, I believe the dawn arrives eventually. The will of D is too stubborn to stay down forever. Luffy is too Luffy to fail completely. The forces of liberation will find a way, will adapt, will push through the thinner margins and higher costs and emerge into sunlight. But it will be a dimmer dawn, a later dawn. A dawn that cost more than it should have because the kindling never caught fire the way it was supposed to. Ace's death wasn't narrative cruelty. It was the match that lit the pyre. And without it, the world burns slower, colder, with less light to guide it toward morning. That's the answer to the question we started with. What if Ace never died at Marineford? The world survives. The story continues. But something essential is missing. Some fire that should have spread. Some will that should have transmitted. Some breaking that should have enabled rebuilding. The hole in Ace's chest wasn't just a wound. It was a door. And by closing it, we closed off the path the dawn was supposed to take. Man on the internet, signing off from the longest autopsy I've ever performed on a fictional timeline. We've been in these word mines for hours, folks, and I hope you found something worth excavating. But you let me know what you think in the comments. And please do subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.